Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We are running just a few minutes late, so we will be starting momentarily. Thank you. All right, good afternoon, and I want to welcome everyone to our Wake County Board of Education special call meeting this afternoon. It is Thursday, January 14th. It is approximately 3:43, so we'll call this meeting to order. We do have a quorum. All board members, Dr. Martin is not with us, but he should be joining us, I assume, momentarily. But other than that, all 8 board members are here, along with the superintendent. We are here assembled in the boardroom, and so we do have a quorum. At this time, if I could ask everyone to stand with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we'll get right into it. As usual, we'll run through with any comments from superintendent. Our board, we do have one single agenda item tonight, and that is to receive information from staff and Superintendent Moore with regard to plans for our second semester reopening, and then taking the action at that time, if any is necessary. But I will start, as we normally do, with any comments from Superintendent Moore.
Good evening, Chair Sutton and board members. I do not have any comments this evening.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any comments at this time either. I'll save those for our regular meeting scheduled on Tuesday. So at this point, I'll pass it on. Okay, I'll see now from the Vice Chair. Any board members wishing to make a comment this afternoon? Okay, seeing none, we'll move right on through. If I can ask for a motion to approve tonight's meeting agenda, this afternoon's meeting agenda.
Chair Sutton, I make a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
Second.
Got a motion from Ms. Mahaffey and a second by Ms. Johnson-Hoster to approve this afternoon's meeting agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Tonight's meeting agenda, afternoon's meeting agenda is approved. So that takes us to our information / action item, which is again a information to receive information on second semester reopening plans for in-person instruction. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Moore.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton and board members. Today we will bring you information based on where we were last week as of January 5th for some additional information that the board wanted, and then some additional context and information for your consideration for second semester. I'm going to wait till the presentation comes up. We're on slide 2. Thank you. During our January 5th board meeting, we spent a considerable amount of time searching for a way to teach as many students as possible in person during second semester while adhering as closely as possible to safety protocols, especially the task of social distancing. During that conversation, it became apparent the number of differences among schools, from building layouts to staffing needs, that made it impossible to make a decision without relying on assumptions or anecdotal information. To address that need, the board requested that staff collect more information from schools to better inform a discussion about the feasibility of reducing class sizes for grades 4 and 5 without using 3-week rotations and being fully in person. In response, area superintendents organized information from the principals using a uniform set of open-ended questions with them. Before we review the information that was gathered since January 5th, we should set the context of this conversation by reviewing the 3 basic considerations that have driven the district's decisions and discussions since the fall. More specifically, is there any new or additional information from Department of Health and Human Services or from the governor? Are there any new lessons learned from our collaboration with health officials or the ABC Science Collaborative? And finally, is there any new information available from monitoring the implementation of our district's current plan and programming? January 5th was not that long ago. However, there are several key updates. On January 6th, Governor Cooper issued Executive Order 188, which extends his stay-at-home orders and other restrictions through January 29th. It is worth noting that these executive orders do not provide any updated guidance on whether schools should operate in Plan A, B, or C, as community statewide metrics are changing. Also on January 6th, the Department of Health and Human Services issued a secretarial directive telling North Carolinians to stay home except for essential activities and to avoid gathering, especially indoors, with people who do not live with you. As with past guidance from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, it does not provide direct guidance on how schools should operate, as schools are considered essential activities. The North Carolina DHHS County Alert System continued to list Wake County in the category of substantial community spread, orange. This is the same category as previous alerts throughout December. Counties to the east of Wake are listed in the category of critical community spread, and there are some to our west that are significant. The average 2-week percentage of positive cases has increased since we last met on January 5th to over 11%, and I believe today around 10.8 or so. While certainly unwelcome, the increase was predicted following the holiday season. The county continues to post rates that are lower than the state average, which is currently at 14.7, but that gap ebbs and flows. District indicators since January 5th offer little new information given the December decision to open schools with remote instruction for all students during the first 2 weeks of January. This summary would be incomplete if we did not point out that the confirmed secondary transmission rate on campuses prior to break was low. Based on our work with the ABC Science Collaborative and by our reasoning, we are confident that this is due to a high level of compliance among staff and students to the 3 Ws, especially requirements to wear face covering at all times and keep as much social distance as possible inside our buildings and classrooms. Our staff and students should be applauded for these efforts. The ABC Science Collaborative also recently released a study that summarized data from 11 school districts that collectively enroll about 90,000 students. The results of that study show that confirmed secondary transmission in schools was significantly reduced by compliance with the 3 Ws. The ABC Science Collaborative will be back with us at the next board work session on January 19th. We also need to acknowledge several key pieces of information that the board did not request at the January 5th meeting, but could weigh on our discussion today. This week, the governing board of the Wake County Division of Principals and Assistant Principals offered its assessment of the current situation. This is a separate organization from the district that does not directly answer to district leadership or the school board, but they do collectively work with and have committees that speak for principal needs in the district. The association is recommending the school district remain all remote at this time. It also asked for a tentative return to in-person instruction at the end of third quarter. The Wake chapter of NCAE also conducted a separate survey this week. That association reported about 88% of nearly 4,000 teachers surveyed do not feel confident that the current safety protocols will keep students and staff safe given the amount of virus in the community. NCAE reports that over 70% of the survey responses are from WCPSS educators that are not members of NCAE. This, too, is a separate organization from the district that does not answer directly to district leadership or the school board. According to the leadership of the Teachers Association, great work and progress has been made to create safer conditions, and our school district is providing reporting mechanisms that no other district has available to them. The association believes the protocols are correct, but overwhelmingly it reports that the vast majority of employees who responded to that survey are not confident that these measures can continue to be effective given the current infection rates in the community. Consequently, they have asked the district to remain in remote instruction until the percentage of positive test results returns to 5% or less, or educators begin the process of vaccinations. While parents have not been formally surveyed, there has been an obvious and rapid increase in the number of parents asking principals to let them transfer from in-person instruction in second semester to virtual academy. In high schools alone, parents have made approximately 1,350 requests since January 4th to move their students from Plan B to virtual academy. As you know from your own emails, we also have many parents who are lobbying the school district to begin in-person instruction as soon as possible. We have also had some teachers advocate for remaining in-person instruction. You are likely aware that other North Carolina districts, including some neighboring districts, have chosen recently to move into remote into at least March. Those districts include Durham, Chapel Hill, Orange, except for lower grades, I believe K1, Cumberland, and Alamance. Johnston County intends to remain in remote until February 1, when it is scheduled to return with a limited rotation for all students. Guilford has delayed the return of in-person instruction for grades 6-12 for at least 3 weeks, but they are remaining in person with their lower grades. Health officials in Charlotte have advised all schools operate remotely through February 2nd. And this morning, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School System Board voted to remain in remote learning until February 15th for elementary students and February 22nd for secondary students. We did not list remote instruction for all students as an option as we were working with principals this past week because it was not discussed by board members or contemplated by the leadership at our January 5th meeting. We did not seek principal feedback about that option at that time. However, all of us are aware of this information, and we appreciate that this issue is being widely discussed by staff and families at this time. It did not seem appropriate under the circumstances to ignore the feedback that we were getting since our meeting from last week. We should also note that several conversations have occurred in the past week with state and county health officials about the vaccine distribution schedule. At both the state and local levels, health officials have expressed some caution about setting a definitive timeline for educator vaccines. WCPSS has invited the Wake County Health Department to provide an update at our work session next week. The next few slides will be presented by Dr. Edward McFarland, Chief of Academic Advancement.
Thank you. So with the additional considerations in mind, Board, that Superintendent Moore has just reviewed, the board asked us to provide information about returning to in-person instruction for grades 4 and 5. So in collecting information for today's discussion, there was a focus on these 3 options. The first is to proceed with our current approved plan that was approved in December, calling for all students pre-K through 5th grade and our regional programs to return to school for in-person instruction unless they are enrolled in the virtual academy. The second option is to return all students in grades pre-K through 5th grade and regional programs who are not enrolled in the virtual academy, but to redistribute staff and students in ways that would limit classes to no more than approximately 20 students. And finally, the third option is to remain in the current 3-week rotation for grades 4 and 5. Please notice that in each of these options, grades 9 through 12 would offer in-person instruction to those who are not enrolled in the virtual academy on a 3-week rotation. This portion of the plan would return approximately 20,000 high school students to in-person instruction. However, as I said, that would be divided among 3 cohorts. Middle school students would also remain in their cohorts just as they did prior to the winter break. So in reviewing each of the 3 options, we encourage you to also reference a companion document that's been included in your materials called Compare and Contrast Second Semester Implications, Grades 4 and 5. The next few slides are a summary of the information and data collected in response to board members' questions about the return to in-person instruction for 4th and 5th grade. So looking here on slide 7, This slide represents information that was gathered on the current approved plan, and that is that all 4th and 5th grade students return to in-person instruction every day. The most obvious advantage is that this option would increase face-to-face instruction, and it would bring back the largest number of students. It would not disrupt master schedules of schools that have already been created for second semester based on the most recent virtual academy and in-person registration and enrollment numbers. As you can also see, the most common theme among principals when asked about our current plan of returning 4th and 5th grade students is that class sizes could pose a significant barrier. Classes could be too large in many 4th and 5th grade spaces across the district, making social distancing not feasible and or difficult at best. Other themes that emerged for this option also included that there could be loss of staff flexibility covering urgent needs in school, and also a larger number of students in common areas would further strain a school's ability to effectively follow safety protocols. So this slide addresses advantages and barriers if we were to require and reconfigure all 4th and 5th grade classes contain 20 or less students. The most obvious advantages of redistributing the staff and students to create classes of roughly 20 students or less also means there would be more face-to-face in-person instruction, as students would no longer be in cohort rotations. And we certainly know that keeping class sizes at 20 or lower also allows for better social distancing. However, principals did report significant concerns about this option regarding instructional quality and school operations. More specifically, common themes that emerged were that reassigning current staff to 4th and 5th grade would create an inability to properly staff the school due to absences, quarantines, a limited applicant pool. Put a little differently, with the staff spread thin to reduce class sizes, there would be little room to accommodate daily staff shortages that are now being covered by interventionists, specialists, AIG teachers, as those personnel could potentially, in this scenario, be permanently assigned to 4th and 5th grade classrooms. There was also some concern about physical space for the additional classes that would be required, and that space could be limited. 45 schools would have to relocate their virtual academy teachers out of their current space to conform to this request. And this would possibly require that virtual academy teachers now share classrooms throughout the day. More in-person teachers also mean larger virtual academy classes. In the information that was collected, about 20% of elementary schools already have at least one virtual academy class with more than 30 students enrolled. And in this option, more than 140 teachers would need to be hired to accommodate this scenario. This would be even after redistributions and reassignments. Also of note, 76 elementary schools would have to hire at least one new teacher to make this work. Also included is many teacher and student assignments would likely change from what's already been planned for and messaged to teachers, students, and families. Allowing 4th and 5th graders to remain on a 3-cohort rotation had the most support among principals despite its barriers. While this approach would be a change from fully in-person learning, it offers some significant advantages from the principal's perspective. More specifically, it is consistent with the first semester schedule that staff and students have already experienced and are familiar with. 95% of schools believe that they could practice social distancing while remaining in cohort rotations with grades 4 and 5. With the cohort rotations, students also remain in small bubbles in grades 4 and 5 because of the minimal number of students that are attending in-person, face-to-face instruction each week. This option provides stability. Teachers, students, and families would not have to change assignments in most of the cases. School leaders did report this is a safer option. One principal saying that remaining in cohorts would solve many of the current class size and social distancing challenges that we have due to 4th and 5th grade class sizes. There are, however, continued concerns about students that do not log in for online instruction or that miss days of instruction during the 2 weeks that they are away from the building. The Division of Schools, namely the area superintendents, academics, human resources, and the DRNA have gathered and compiled a lot of this information over the past week. And I know, Board, that you continue to engage constantly with our constituents on all sides of these very difficult decisions and conversations. So once Superintendent Moore finishes her comments, a team is assembled and they're ready for dialogue and to answer any questions that you may have. Superintendent Moore.
Thank you, Edward. When we met on January 5th, we made it clear that the staff recommendation had not changed. We would not likely change absent additional guidance from the school board or additional information. Since then, we realized that you and district staff have had many individual conversations with parents, teachers, and each other. And as we have noted, other significant changes have occurred, primarily triggered by the greater rates of infection in our community. When considering that information in total, from teachers, principals, parents, and health officials, and these are not always aligned, we would make the following recommendation from staff. Remain in remote learning for all grade levels and all students. Continue to work closely with the county and other vaccine providers to confirm details of a vaccine distribution schedule. Continue to review the status of community spread, vaccine distributions, and efforts to engage additional substitute teachers to determine how quickly students can return to in-person instruction with a target date of mid-February for a decision. While we continue to believe that the current plan of rotations could be carried out, we deeply respect and value the feedback and input of our building-level principals and educators. They have made it clear that staffing and safety concerns due to the increased numbers in the community leave them unable to effectively carry out these rotations, and we have seen decisions by parents to remove themselves from in-person instruction. We can't ignore those requests either. I want to acknowledge that we know this recommendation will disappoint many families. On another level, I want to share that this recommendation is also heartbreaking for some of our own staff, especially those with students in high school. So while our desire to support a continuation or return to in-person learning and implement the previously adopted plan is in our thoughts, our current review of the data, in particular our current levels of community spread and the feedback from school-based staff, tell us the path at this time is to remain in remote for all students. We got a team ready to answer questions, and I encourage the board to engage in discussion and review and determine what your pleasure is as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore, for the thorough review of information and the recommendation as well. We certainly appreciate you and the staff taking to heart the thoughts of the board from our discussion around January 5th, going and taking the time to survey and review data from our principals and teachers, and that is quite helpful for us. So, board, we have some conversation, discussion, and deliberation to have. You have heard the recommendation from Superintendent Moore and our team to remain in virtual learning for the foreseeable future until mid-February, and at that time making a decision upon returning at that time. You've heard the considerations, so I'll open the floor up now for some discussion. Ms. Carter.
All right, thank you. Well, kind of just some comments, and just want to start off and say, I know it's been acknowledged this is not what the board asked for a week ago. We did get part of that information, but it was not a request for a complete redo of the plan. And I'm concerned because we are being asked to make a decision today, and there are, to me, major pieces missing. I do acknowledge and appreciate that NCAE did a survey and received almost 4,000 responses, and I appreciate the information that it did provide. However, I do have areas of concern. The first is, it was reported to me, and again, I couldn't verify this, so I'm just going on what multiple people reported, that they were able to access the survey, even though they were not employees, and take the survey multiple times. Additionally, we have over 19,000 staff members, and I believe that's a little over 16,000 are school-based staff. I don't have it in front of me. Is that, I think that's about right. So for me, we're missing around 12,000 voices. And to me, all of the school staff and non-school-based staff deserve to be heard. And additionally, there are more questions I would like to see posed to staff, specifically because I'm getting emails from multiple staff members saying they want to be in person. So I reached out, I asked if there was going to be a staff survey. I was told not at this time, and I was referred to other tools that time has been spent on. But when I look at those tools do not provide the information we need to make an informed decision. And I ask that moving forward as a system, we proactively seek, it's kind of like related to the substitute teacher thing, proactively seek feedback so do we come to make a decision with all the pieces of information. Additionally, I've asked, because I think it's important to have figures on the students that we are not reaching. I've asked for the number of dropouts and the students not engaging, because to me, I think that's pertinent information to know. And part of the feedback, I think, that was shared when going over slide 9 was a principal said they were concerned about students not logging in during a 2-week rotation. Well, then my question is, how are they going to do if it's fully remote every single week? So I cannot support this recommendation. Our children, families, and all staff deserve our decisions to be made with more inclusive information. Dr. Cohen on January 11th tweeted, and part of her tweet said, only leave for essential businesses like work, school, grocery shopping, or receiving health care. Lastly, I've finished by just a few more things. I appreciate everybody's patience. I want to read number 15 from policy 2120, the code of ethics and responsibility for the school board members under the specific board member commitments. And that states, remember always that a board member's first and greatest concern must be the educational welfare of the students attending the public schools. During a pandemic, safety must be a priority, and I ask that we work to balance both priorities. I am hearing from way too many families and way too many staff members that this recommendation does not provide that balance.
Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and thanks to the staff and Superintendent Moore for the added information, and just to extend comments. When we put together this plan and when we were meeting on January 5th, I got a lot of feedback from parents, and I said, we want to go forward with January 20th. We've been clear about that. And since that time, seeing the metrics and hearing from teachers in District 6 who are in District 6 schools that are emailing me on their staff email, so I know they're the verified teacher in Wake County and in District 6. There are concerns about their health and safety, not only for themselves, but their families and their students. So while I appreciate the ABC Collaborative came out with their study, but it showed, they did their study when community incidence was down. And in talking with other board members and looking at other boards, that I appreciated that summary, Superintendent Moore, from what other districts are seeing and doing. The community spread is putting our schools at risk. Even though our schools are not spreading COVID in the community spread is putting our staff, our students, our families at risk when we're getting together, as Secretary Cohen said, in greater than 10 groups of 10. It doesn't magically solve the problem when you step into a school that a gathering of more than 10 people does not expose people to COVID. That's where my concern is. No one on this board is discounting the need for students to be in person. None of our teachers are. But safety and health does have to come first. You're right about that, Ms. Carter. And the innovation, we had a District 6 Board Advisory Council meeting yesterday, and the number of energized principals and teachers and staff and parents talking about the innovation that's happened in our schools around, and the pivoting and the work to reach our students, it has to be lifted up. So there is great learning going on in remote, not for all students, but for a vast majority of our students. And it's the safe choice right now. So I feel as though our pivot to the all remote from the 4th to the 15th was the right choice, and extending it a week, 2 weeks, a month for the health and safety of our students should be considered by this board today. So I want us also to focus on the vaccine. I think we're so close. The light at the end of the tunnel is to expand vaccinations, and so I'm hoping that as a system we work really hard with the county to get our teachers prioritized. I think vaccinations will help our teachers and our staff feel confident to be back in our buildings so that we can go to Plan A for all of our students that want to be in the building. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mrs. Kushner. Ms. Mahaffey.
I have a question for Dr. Matillo. I'm curious, over these past 2 weeks, how many substitutes have we needed by being all in the virtual space versus when we were in building with K-8 and regional programs? It's Dr. Matillo here.
Dr. Matillo, are you on?
Sorry, I was just jumping on, sorry. So prior to the break, we were looking at subs from about December 7th through December 18th, and we were looking at about 509 per day. Over the past couple weeks here, we were more like 97 the first week in January and about 105 per day so far this second week here.
Thank you, Dr. Matillo.
Yes, ma'am.
Today, we are in a place we hoped we wouldn't be as we closed out the first semester, and a place that we really hoped we wouldn't be when we made the decision to go remote back in December. We have spent hours around this table and in the virtual space hearing about the importance of the 3 Ws. Our elementary and middle school students have become experts in masking and hand washing. They have had silent lunches facing in the same direction in order to prevent COVID-19 from spreading in our schools and to keep their peers and their teachers safe. And thanks to the vigilance of our teachers, administrators, IAs, and other school-based staffs, we saw a low instance of secondary transmission while our students were in the building. Through my emails and conversations with parents throughout the district, I have heard the successes and struggles of both in-person and remote learning. And I've heard especially from our high school families who have not, with the exception of state testing, been inside of a school building since March. We have, as a district, talked about the 3 Ws and the importance of that. We stressed that at our board meeting in December. We stressed that at our last board meeting. And still, we've seen the rate of community spread of COVID-19 rise in our state and in our county. And this raise gained swiftness after Thanksgiving, and we saw its impact in our schools, with staff needing to stay home in order to comply from our health department. And we saw how this left gaps in our schools and how our schools struggled to fill those gaps, and it stretched our employees so that they could help their colleagues and help our students be educated in the building. My family didn't sign up for Virtual Academy, and we knew that by doing so, our 3 children would get that chance of in-person instruction. And I have 1 who benefited from being in Plan A, and 2 that saw 4 days of school in rotation. So these are benefits of being in building that I saw in my own children, in addition to hearing from community members. We knew by not choosing Virtual Academy, there was a possibility for shifts between Plan A and B and C. And I fully acknowledge that the realities of remote learning are hard. Today alone, we navigated tears, frustration, distraction, work that was missed and needed to be turned in. I saw moments of engagement and a couple smiles too. And I'm in awe of our teachers and thinking of the lift that they've had to do since March in order to get that remote space engaging for kids, even if it is just moments. And I want children to be back in the building. We've heard and read the research about the benefits of children being in school, but without proper staffing, we can't come close to the adherence of the 3 Ws that's required to maintain safety. So here we are again, hoping, begging that the community guidance issued by the Department of Health and Human Services of waiting, wearing a mask, washing your hands, limiting gatherings, only going out for essential needs, and staying at home will slow the spread of COVID-19 so that our community transmission can go down. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Dr. Martin?
Thank you, and thank you, Superintendent Moore and staff, for bringing your additional recommendation and for seeking input from particularly schools. It is no secret that I agree with you, Ms. Carter. There's a lot more information that we need to know, not only for making decisions, but for planning in the future. I have been told that attendance has not differed that much. In fact, in some cases, even gone down in the in-person once the rotations came into effect. We need to know that information. So there's a lot of questions that we do have. I would particularly like to ask that, and I will be supporting this recommendation, but I would like to ask in the process of this that we develop greater clarity on how the decision will be made going forward for February, for whenever it will be. Absolutely, we cannot have a line in the sand, right? Statements that say we should not, have a specific metric that is a line in the sand, that is absolutely correct. Till you look at the variation, 5%, 6%, 4%, we don't want a line in the sand. At the same time, metrics matter. And so what I'm asking for is not a line in the sand, but also not an arbitrary, we will review. What are the criteria for review? And it needs to be more than just questions. It will need to include metrics. It will need to include a number of things, but my request is that we develop some kind of a framework so that both the board and the community can understand our progress toward that framework, because it shouldn't come down to the wire to decide, are we going to open or are we not going to open, in a vote that may have an impact the next day, the next week. So a framework where there's clarity, are we going in the right direction or not? Secondly, to help think about the decision, it's been frustrating to me, it's been frustrating to many people, data here, data there, here a data, there a data, everywhere a data. as a data scientist myself, that's extremely frustrating. And it's particularly frustrating because we know that school-based reporting is incomplete. We know that contact tracing is incomplete. And strong conclusions are being made, being stated with incomplete data. That's not how decisions should be made. I'm not going to claim anything to be perfect, but to try to help gain a better understanding. Last night I went to the North Carolina Health Department, selected Wake County, and looked at the cases by demographics, because you can get the age demographics. They have it grouped in groupings of 0 to 1-year-olds, 2 to 4-year-olds, 5 to 9-year-olds, and so on. The 5 through 17 age group is the age group of students. The 25 to 64 age group is the age group where our staff occur. And of course, then you've got all of the other age groups. So I went to that graph and I pulled out all that data so I could plot it. I then also went to the census website, where you can get the population by each of those age groups, so that we can get the numbers of cases per 1,000 for each of the demographics. Because what we see in the data is the same issue that we see when we're talking about achievement. If we look at the average for a whole school, you're averaging the high flyers and those who are struggle, and the averages tell you almost nothing. So if we don't know what the age distribution in our county is, we can look at our numbers and we learn very little. So by comparing the census data and the health department data, right, this is not school-based cases. This is cases reported on the health department, because we don't know if we've got a complete set. We need to ask better questions. But when we do that, what I find is that the week ending on October 25th, which is the last week before the in-person rotation started, children in the age group 5 to 17 had an incidence of COVID infection of 0.5 per 1,000 population. In the staff age group 25 to 64, that same week, 1.1 per 1,000 adults in that 25 to 64 age group were infected by COVID. By contrast, the last week of reported data ends January the 3rd. That week, 3.4 per 1,000 children ages 5 to 17 years old and 4.7 adults ages 25 to 64 were infected by COVID. That respectively is a 6.7 times increase for children and a 4.7 times increase for our staff age adults. Now, to put that in context, the 0 to 4 age category increased by 5 times during that same time period. As I've just noted, the 5 to 17-year-olds increased by 6.7 times. The 18 to 24-year-olds, these are college-age students, they only increased by 3.9 times. As I noted, the adults of staff age increased by 4.7 times. The adults 65 and over increased by 5.5 times. I was very surprised to see that it is the greatest increase between October 25th and the last reported week of January 3rd was of our children ages 5 to 17 years old, increasing 6.7 times. What this means is, unfortunately, we are closing a gap in COVID infections such that the difference between children and adults is getting closer and closer together. These numbers are concerning to me. They are not the only thing that one uses in making a decision, but they clearly must be part of the decision. And what we are seeing is that school-age children are increasing their rate of infection of COVID faster than any other of the cohorts in Wake County. That is information that I think is important for the public to understand, and that is information that is important in my making a decision that right now the recommendation put forward by staff is the wise decision both to help control the pandemic and to ensure the safety of both our children and our staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Mrs. Cash.
There's a couple of things I want to say first about the data. So I have a lot of confidence in ABC Collaborative, and the reason I still do have the same amount of confidence in that is because I still think even though the frequency of infections are going up, the parallel that they've tried to make clear to us is that the kids in school don't go up as fast. And I'm thinking that actually, Dr. Martin, your data kind of substantiated that, because the infections of kids went up when they were out of school. And when they were in school, it actually proved what ABC Collaborative is saying, and all the physicians are, is that kids are safer in school. So we can talk about
Ms.
that.
Cass, the data does not say that. The data went up faster when the kids were in school than when they were out of school.
Well, you just said till January something.
Between October 25th and January the 3rd.
Okay, well.
I can show you where the jumps are.
Yeah, I would love to look at that.
There is a jump. There are 3 jumps. There is one jump, one particular jump between October 20. I'm sorry. There are 3 jumps. One, and I'll get you the exact dates if you want. There's between November 22 and November 29th. That is likely correlated with Thanksgiving. There's one between December 13th and current, likely correlated, not proof, correlated with the winter holiday effect. There is also a step between October 25th and November 8th, where there is no holiday, but between October 25th and November 8th, that's when things started to open up. That is not proof, but as children went back to school, infection rates went up.
Yeah, I would love to study that data, because I actually,
glad to share it with you.
I actually would love to look at the time frames, and I won't stay in this very long, but I still think that what ABC's Collaborative says, that the kids are safer in school. So I only say that because I think when we talk about that we are doing things for the safety of our staff and we're doing things for the safety of our students, that can't be the same thing, because I do think our students are safer in schools. And I do believe that ABC Collaborative said that, and I still follow that. The thing about healthcare, the one thing I love most about being a healthcare provider is that we actually can't look for studies that support our opinions. We actually have to go with the studies that are given to us on the medications and things, and so it's very clean cut for me. So I just, I'm going to talk about a couple things just real quick, and I promise not to be as long as I'd like to be. But, and hopefully you'll give us an opportunity to say a second thing later, since it's a big discussion, very important. I'm not going to bring up anything today, but I think this is important, and I'll talk more to the superintendent more about this as far as giving any hope to the vaccines for our teachers. Working very hard on something like that and thought we were getting very close, but as of a few minutes ago found out that the vaccines for the Wake County citizens are going to take a very long time to be distributed to Wake County. And because every county, probably because of politics, is getting the same amount of doses per county, no matter what the per capita is. And so the counties that are actually getting the same amount that are smaller populations are actually now have met the needs of the greater than 65, so therefore are vaccinating their teachers because they have extra doses. And therefore Onslow County and a few of these counties, they have now started to vaccinate their teachers. In Wake County, the numbers have figured out, as we can see from the county, some of the county commissioners, we will probably not get our teachers vaccinated this year unless we get it from the federal government, which we could do, and we can work on that. And I'd be glad. I was not going to bring that up today, but I will be glad to look deeper into that. But as of right now, the state and county, that administrative part won't happen, but it might happen if we work with the federal government, which we can do. So I wouldn't put a lot of emphasis on vaccines right now, because in Wake County at least. If you go to another county, you'll probably get a vaccine as a teacher, but not in Wake County. So I want to say something about, I think there's a big difference between quality online learning and quality online teaching. I do think that all of our teachers are doing an amazing job of teaching online. I don't know how they do it, so I'm going to give them 1,000,000 points for that. But quality online learning is not quite the same as what that is. So I went out, I was actually invited by several teachers to look at their quality online education, and I managed to get to 2 of them. And sadly, I won't say more about the other one until I get to that one. But they were amazing teachers. I mean, they were so good, and they were online teaching. They were elementary teachers. But when I went to watch their class, the one teacher had 11 kids on the screen. And I said, wow, you have like 11 kids? I said, that's amazing. She said, well, no, we have 19, but that's how many usually get online. Oh, and I said, well, that's 8 kids that aren't getting online, and I don't know what we do about those 8, because those are the 8 I'm most worried about, because that's actually the school board's responsibility, as you just said, Ms. Carter. It's our responsibility to take care of the 8 that are not online. That was a second grade class. And I'd watch the kids, they were kind of in and out of online, but she was doing a really good job. I mean, she's an amazing teacher. But there were 8 that didn't sign on. And she did say that was kind of regular in that class. I went to a 4th grade teacher class, and I was, again, just blown away by the teaching that was going on. But she only had 21 of her 28 kids on there. So it's, again, not all of them were on there. And she said that was a good day for her, actually. Again, the kids that were online in 4th grade were amazingly engaged. The 2nd graders were they were 2nd graders. I loved them. But right there in 2 classes, I counted like 18 kids or so that we weren't even touching. I was hoping we would get a percent today, like you asked for, Ms. Carter, on how many kids were not engaging on online learning, because that can't go for the rest of the year, and that I'm scared that it's gone too long. But I would venture to guess, and I hope the facts are just not there, that I would venture to guess from what I'm seeing is that at least 30% of our free and reduced lunch kids are not online. And if they are not online, we can say we're not closed, but to those kids, we are closed. Because they come to the classroom and when school is in session, but when they're not in the classroom, they are several locations. Most of them aren't at home, or they may be home with a sibling, but they just can't get online. So all those kids that are already struggling in life to begin with, they're our responsibility. So we've got to get to them. And if we don't bring them to the classroom with teachers, then I want us to come up with another way of reaching all those children as soon as possible. And then I want to say this. This is not a popular thing to talk about. I did ask one of the NCA reps, what do we do about the kids that are offline? And well, this isn't what I was going to talk about, so this was just in I said, what do we do about these kids that are not online, or they're playing, or they're leaving? And my answer was, well, we can't control those variables. This school board does need to control those variables, because those are our kids in the public school system. And I had not read what you had read tonight, Ms. Carter, but I always have felt that those kids are our responsibility, even if they're not in our classroom on a class day. And if we are going to attempt to take them out of the class, then I think we better come up with some grandiose idea on how we're going to meet those kids' needs in their homes or daycares or wherever. And then the unpopular thing that I was going to say was we are at a choice here. The sad thing is we're either going to lose families or we're going to lose teachers. And it's one or the other we're losing. I hope we could come up with a win-win and not lose any of them. And I'm not choosing one over the other, but we are directly facing losing children in our school system or losing teachers in our school system. And I cannot believe we're at this crossroads. But it's a question we need to come up with an answer, and I do not believe that means going remote for an indefinite amount of time until some vaccine that's not going to come here comes up, or something else happens that I don't know I can foresee. And again, we're a large school system, and if we can't begin to treat all the schools differently in some way in order to make this work, or if we can't set up some grade level facilitation for kids that are struggling on their computers, then we've lost a large amount of children during this time. Not necessarily all in being gone, but a lot in learning. So again, I just end this conversation with the fact that I have never doubted that a teacher that taught online was not going above and beyond what they need to do, above and beyond the amount of work that we expected out of them, more than we should expect out of them. But it's not them that's not meeting the bar. It's the kids that are not getting on the computer that are missing out. And again, I just say to those kids, school is actually closed. That's just all I can say.
Thank you, Mrs. Cash. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I do have just a couple of questions before I'll just kind of share what I've been thinking about. And the first one, I'm not sure, and my apologies for not asking this before because it might take a little bit of research, but do we know how many individual schools had positive cases since we did reopen buildings in October? Do we know how many individual schools did have confirmed cases out of the, I mean, I know the high schools.
We may be able to get that while we're talking, so I'm going to have some folks that are.
It was over 2/3 when you're.
The last I formally counted was in November, and it was about 2/3 at that time.
Okay, I appreciate it.
And it's gone up since then.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I was just curious, and if we have access to that, because it's hard, the dashboard updates, it's hard to kind of go back in time, and thank you for that. I appreciate Ms. Mahaffey actually asked my question about substitute teachers, and I do have just a follow-up to that. Have we received 1,000 applications, Dr. Matillo? Have we received, seen sort of an uptick in applications coming through since starting the?
I think I'm sorry?
No, I'm sorry. You go ahead. Thank you.
I'm sorry, we're a little shy of 1,000, I think, but we have definitely seen an uptick. A couple data points. The interest forum that we launched, we had 705 subs complete that. We've had 315 subs attend a virtual interest session today, so that was good news. We had 49 attend last week's virtual interest session, so we are seeing improvements there. So yeah, we are starting to see the interest. We are starting to see applications being completed, and should be able to begin transferring those over to orientation sessions and hires.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And thank you to our community for sending in those applications and for your willingness to help in our schools. That's very positive news. And again, you know, we are in a state of emergency here. So I don't want to discount the fact that a highly qualified, well-trained, qualified instructor is ideally who we have in front of our students, but we're in a state of emergency, and especially we do need adults who are willing to help supervise and facilitate the education taking place in our classrooms. So I appreciate that information. It's been really difficult to look at the data presented to us when we look at the reopen school, the reopening our schools, the Safe Schools, Strong Schools, Reopen Kit, all of the, in addition to the ABC Science Collaborative information and the most recent study that they put out, but all of this does refer back to CDC guidelines. And in those CDC guidelines, they do state how to keep community, how to, make your schools as safe as possible. They do stress the distance of 6 feet. They do have the low risk, or the lowest risk, of course, is virtual. Slightly above that is a hybrid model where you have reduced number of students in your school, avoid sharing objects, 6 feet, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of the documents that we receive also refer back to guidance from the CDC. And it's really hard for me as a music teacher, as a mom, as someone who does not have a medical background, to say, well, which of these should I pick and choose from to make my decision? Because then it becomes to the public, it looks like it is simply a decision made on political or personal values than it is based in science. And I have reached out to everyone I could think to reach out to beg and plead for hard data, harder, concrete metrics that are tangible, that we can see and understand when we make these decisions. Because we can all refer to studies, we can all refer to data that will help us feel better about the choices we make. And it's very hard when we see information to us that seems to logically conflict each other. And that's something that I personally have struggled with. I still very much believe in masks. I believe in the distancing, the hand washing. I know that there are ways to interrupt the spread of this virus. We also still don't know a lot about the new virus, and that is a concern, given the information that we received at our last meeting about the viral load being a bit more. I mean, those are concerns when we understand that there are situations in our schools where masks are not a possibility during eating, drinking, snacks, and for many of our students who have medical exemptions or just an inability to wear them. And so that is a concern. And I need more information about that to make me feel like this is a decision that is going to be in the best interest of as many people as possible. Because what we've been faced with this entire time is that one decision we make that will greatly benefit a group of stakeholders will negatively impact another group of stakeholders, and they can be within the same group. Was something great for one set of students will be hard for another, for their families, for our employees, and for that matter, all of the businesses and the partners that we have in our community. It is absolutely soul-crushing, because as educators, we are in the business of differentiating our lesson plans. We are in the business of reaching a child where they are, no matter where they are, so that they have the opportunity to achieve, so that they have the opportunity to be the best student that they can. And having said that, I have all the confidence in the world in our teachers. As Ms. Cash just stated, they are outstanding. When I look back to the end of 2020, and I've said this a few times, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself in this space, but watching the Holderness family end of the year Christmas card, and Kim, the mother, teared up as she was looking to her children saying, oh my gosh, you've been through a lot, and our kids have been through so much. And to me, I think of that too with my own children. And I think the reason why my own, recognizing that there are so many who are struggling, but the gains that have been made for children have been because their teachers and the principals and the folks leading their schools have been able to go above and beyond. And also because parents and family members, we go above and beyond for our kids. And I do believe there are going to be big gaps. There will be some students who will never fully achieve. This is going to be something, the loss of learning that has absolutely occurred is going to be, for some, something that they may never completely catch up with their peers. But what I do know is that if anyone can help students recover from that in the months as we do have access to the vaccine, as we do start to overcome COVID, which will take some time, but as we are able to adjust and have more options for what adjusting looks like, the teachers in the Wake County public school system are the ones who are going to help those kids catch up. They're going to help those students. And last, when we are looking at these students that are struggling, particularly those from lower income homes, students who receive free and reduced lunch, students who are in families that are experiencing homelessness, reaching these students has always been a priority of this school board and should always be a priority of all of us. And that we should always be looking to reach out to these families. And we have such excellent family engagement and Title I coordinators who are teaching us how to reach these students, who are teaching us that some of the issues that are impacting these students' ability to be present are things that have always been there. And so I ask that that we keep that in mind, that this is a struggle that we have always faced, and unfortunately, this pandemic has amplified that concern even more. And the last thing I do want to say is when Ms. Cash and I were able to observe a kindergarten virtual academy teacher, and this was towards the beginning of the school year, right before we were transitioning back in this classroom of these kindergarten students, their first experience in school, being at a computer screen, we heard more than one student say, I want to be a teacher when I grow up. And that's a student who has not set foot in a classroom, who's not had those blocks, who didn't get a hug, because that's how amazing our teachers are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you. Again, like the last couple of weeks, I continue to struggle because it's the pressure to find the right words, and I finally decided after witnessing the violence on our nation's capital last week that I can't find the words because we're a country that lives in complete dichotomy. It's either left, right, north, south, or right or wrong. We have not found our way to the middle to reconcile our multiple truths that we all hold. And that truly is why I believe for me that in addition to the true fear in the impact of COVID, but it's also been the difficulty of making a decision, and it's also why the public hears us and feels that it's been inconsistent. And I certainly do say, and I challenge all of us to think about the lens in which we listen to one another and the lens that people listen to board members. When I say that I do absolutely, with the core of my belief, believe that our children are better off in a building, face-to-face instructions with educators, that is true. My vote has been completely inconsistent, and I've explained each time that because each time I've voted at this table and shared why I voted, it is absolutely because of the three things, the three variables that are listed at the top of this PowerPoint. What does the government say? What does the data say? And what is best for teaching and learning? And God knows I wish they were all consistently the same each time. But all three of those factors have variability. And as I was saying to someone yesterday, sometimes they feel weighted like a grade. Like this particular subject is, this EOC is worth 60% of your grade. And the next week, the state plan and the governor's edict and the dire emergency of our county could be far more outweighed than teaching and learning because of the direct impact of those two variables will have on people's livelihoods. And the reality is that fear, and there's fear on both sides. Fear of the loss our students are having from not being in a building, the fear teachers are experiencing of not touching their students' lives by being in physical space with them, but also the fear of being in that building and the loss of lives and the loss of actual teaching and learning, because whether we like it or not, the way the brain processes trauma is even if those children are in a building and we are continuously filling our media waves with one or the other, that all sits in that classroom with our young people and our teachers. And the way that they're teaching, learning, are both being impacted by the ways that we talk at each other and the ways that we continue to other the other side of whatever that decision coin is. And the reality is there isn't a right or wrong here. There is no way that we can find a space of what we would consider truth, because anytime you're making a decision where somebody wants something else, there is loss. There is inherent loss, and there's nothing you can do about loss but speak truth to it and find a way forward in healing. I'm not naive that there are a gazillion challenges to either decision we make at this board table. But what I do know for sure is that I'm human, and I've been transparent to every single email. Unfortunately, you all have not been answered. I walked in today, and in less than 24 hours, there's 400 new emails. But every phone call and every text message is just like everyone else. We're not a monolith, and it is possible to hold two truths for me. And today, in every vote I've taken, those two truths have been, I want them in the building, and some of my votes has been keeping them in face-to-face. I want them in the building is still true, and some of my votes are to send them home, because for me, in this moment, the variable is really about the impact of being in a building full of trauma and the fear that both parents and students and teachers will be in those buildings with. And at the end of the day, if I could vote to send all of our kids back on Plan A, I would if I truly believed that they were, one, safe, and two, were going to have the best opportunities of teaching and learning if they were in the building. I don't believe that, because I believe that when we continue to spread fear and separate each other and be divisive, that plays out for our students. And anyone who thinks that we can walk in those buildings and not use the filter of the barrage of hatred and that are being spewed out of us is just not being honest with yourself. And so for me, the biggest decision today, and I told everybody, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get to the table. But when I sat down and turned on my computer, the thing that I do know is I would be remiss not to speak truth to power. I do it every day in my job, and I have to do it sitting at this table. And do I want those kids in school? Yes. Can I today, with a sound mind and body, go home and say to my daughter that I'm going to send her back to school even though this is the first time I legitimately fear the impact of her safety? Because I'm going to tell you, as a parent, the first time I got the email saying there's a case at her school, it hit me in a way that I had not been prepared. And she's not even in the building. But just the mere fear of saying, oh, wow, this is the building that I'm going to send my kid back to. And so, and I didn't have that perspective, right? Because I hadn't had an email that said her school had a case. And since the last time we've been together, I've gotten an email since I've been sitting here that there's one today at our building. That's a real fear. And so to ignore for people who say that they're scared to be in that building, I have a newfound respect for that fear because it became real for me because my daughter was in that school building today. And in the school building, the last time somebody was reported at her school tested positive for COVID because she was there for exams. That hits very differently. And so I say to you today that my truth is, yes, I absolutely would like to say every single time in-person learning would be the variable that would be weighted and I'd send our kids back. But I can't do that. And I will also be honest that it's the first time as a parent that I am speaking to you as a parent and not as a school board member. I know it is not rational to be driven by fear, but I also know that there's a ton of reality to your fears as well. And so I certainly acknowledge that both my husband and daughter, probably for the first time, are waiting with bated breath what my decision will be because I left my house saying to them I didn't know. But I can tell you today that there is no way I could send all of our kids back into those buildings now without some clarity on how can we follow those 3 W's and acknowledging that we'll have the staff who can deliver the teaching and learning that's not tainted with fear, that's not tainted with anxiety, that impacts our students' learning. So I absolutely recognize that there's going to be a ton of lost learning for all of our students. My daughter's going to graduate from high school with about this much of chemistry, thanks to Dr. Martin, but she missed a whole semester of a class that she absolutely needed, and Dr. Martin knows was her favorite subject since the moment we've met. Well, it's not anymore, and that's our reality in our house. It's not. So I'm not speaking from a place of being bullied or being convinced that I should do something that's not real to me, and so I say to you today that the decision I make today, it is personal, and I'm not ashamed to tell you that it absolutely is personal. That's how I would vote today, that it's personal. And every single email and every single phone call and text is personal, and that's what it should be. Because as I said in 2013, that this is the hardest job because we are making decisions for our most precious commodity in our world, and that's our young people.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Ms. Johnson-Hostler frames things very, very well. And I've always respected that about her. She can come in and present both sides of an argument and try to weigh the pros and the cons. And that's difficult to do for many of us with this debate because so many people have so many real and legitimate fears, real and legitimate interests that seem to be in conflict. I want to take some time to acknowledge some things that have been heard that I think we've all heard and I think all of us are concerned about and believe but maybe haven't been articulated. Because when we don't say them, I think people think that we've dismissed them or we haven't listened. I truly believe that the longer the students are in remote, the more they will disengage. And the more that they will drop out, either physically or just in terms of their motivation or just do the minimum to get by. I'm not basing that on my own kids' performance. I'm not basing that on anecdotes. I'm basing that on the number of Fs that we saw first semester. I'm basing that on the lack of participation and attendance. We've seen first semester and going into first quarter and going into second quarter. I'm waiting to see the grades second quarter. I acknowledge and I admire all the work that has gone into trying to reinvent the delivery of education in this environment and all the great work that our teachers are doing. But it's not as effective as face-to-face. We all know that. There is isolation, and it's not just isolation because of our decision. It's isolation because of the safety protocols necessary in the pandemic. I understand and I appreciate that. You know, we've had parents that have been critical because we have allowed for sports, arts, or extracurriculars to proceed, say, for high school students and some others. And parents have been critical. They said, why is that important? That's a safety risk. Or they've said, if you can do that, why can't they come back to class every day? But even giving the students some limited break in that isolation, I feel has been important. And I stand by that. I've talked, and I'll come back to this, I've tried to collect as much information as I can, talking to not just teachers, not just parents, but also health officials, doctors, hospital employees, and others. Medical professionals will tell you that there are real healthcare concerns about this arising from this lack of engagement and from this isolation. For our younger students, we're seeing a real, not just decline in advancement, but a regression in their socialization skills. Young patients that are unable to look their pediatricians in the eye and talk to them, it's almost like they have stranger danger because they've been so isolated during the pandemic. Reading skills, in many cases, have not advanced, or in some cases have declined. For older students, our high school students, counselors, pediatricians, and other doctors will tell you that we're seeing a great increase in the number of eating disorders, of counseling for mental conditions like anxiety and depression. And I'm sure anxiety and depression is up for everyone, adults, for our staff, for other people in the community, for parents as well, because they're dealing with this. Our decision to go to remote isn't causing this isolation. The pandemic is causing this isolation. But when we can return to face-to-face instruction, I do sincerely believe that will help. And I believe, most of our teachers know that it will help and are concerned about the mental health of our children. So many of our teachers have been such strong advocates for more counselors, more social workers, more social and emotional learning for our students. I believe they're in this together, and I believe they don't discount that. Let me get that out there. I also want to say that we have to acknowledge that we have a very, very large portion of our adult professional work staff, our labor pool, that are terrified. These are, rational, reasonable adults that are terrified about the health risks of returning to school. Whether it's they see cases in their school where they think protocols are not being complied with, whether they're worried about asymptomatic spread and the spread of the disease that can't be identified in tracing. I'm not going to judge their fear or their anxiety, but I acknowledge that it's real. And I acknowledge that there are many of them that feel like they're being put either in a life or death situation or having to give up their livelihood. And I feel like, when we talk to the health professionals and we get recommendations and we get advice, I think most of us can look at this, trying to look at it as objective observers, trying to make rational decisions. But when we come up with a recommendation that says, we think this is safe, we think these protocols work, even when we sincerely do, and in our hearts believe they do, and have documented analysis that says that it does, I think many on our staff that hold these fears think we're basically telling them to get over it and just do what we say, and that this is coercive. And I don't know how we reconcile that. I think one thing that will help, and I've tried to be an optimist, I've tried to say, I think we can get everybody back. I want to get everybody back January 20th. We've told these parents, we've told these students, especially our high school students, how many of them are just waiting and waiting to walk through those doors again. And maybe they got a little taste of it in some of the state mandated testing that they had. You know, when can we do this? I was hopeful that our vaccine availability and our distribution would have started. Ms. Cash and I, hopefully everyone knows Ms. Cash's background in pharmacy and her work with WakeMed, and that she's been involved in this effort with vaccination. And I've reached out to staff at UNC Health and Rex and WakeMed and folks in the governor's office talking about vaccinations. And I believe if we could get all of our staff with at least their first vaccination, we could overcome a lot of the fear and anxiety and get staff back in those schools safely. It's not in our power on the school board to get that done because we don't control the vaccine. But I think we need to do everything possible to lobby our state and our county government to get the extra doses of vaccine that the state has that are available into the hands of our frontline workers, into the hands of our teachers, into the hands of our other frontline workers. We have the vaccines. It's not a matter of waiting for them. But when all of the vaccines are distributed to each county, whether you are a Wake County or an Ashe County, whether you are Mecklenburg County or Perkins County, we're talking a huge difference in scale. We have to have the vaccinations for our population. We simply have to. And if we can get those and get those to our staff and teachers, I think we can overcome a lot of this real fear. Now, again, I've talked to a lot of doctors and a lot of health experts. And for a long time, most of them that I spoke with had been very clear that they saw the benefits of face-to-face instruction as outweighing the health risks of any spread of COVID, based on what they've seen about COVID transmission in our schools. I will say that this week, in anticipation of this meeting, going back and talking to several of them, I'm now getting divided opinion. I can't tell you that they all recommend staying in remote or they all recommend going face-to-face. It is divided. But I will say that some of the most persuasive and ardent advocates for face-to-face that I had been talking to have backpedaled some, based on the community infection rates, based on hospitalizations. And that gives me pause. If these are the same pediatricians telling me how desperately they need their patients back in face-to-face instruction, but they're willing to tell me maybe not next week, maybe not the week after that. So I am trying hard, and I'm trying to listen to the health experts that we have. I can't take every link that everyone sends us and follow it as if it's gospel. We'll see people, we all get many of the same emails. Two sides will send us the same article to the same story and both claim it supports whatever side that they want. What is different about where we are now than last week and when we made this decision in December? And Superintendent Moore, I'm going to have some questions for you about some of these. I think we believed that 2-3 weeks after the holiday season ended, we would see a decline in COVID-19 community rates. We knew it would go up over the holidays. I think many of us expected there would be some reasonable decline, as we've seen declines after Labor Day and other holidays where we had seen spikes. It doesn't appear that that's happened. The other issue that we've been working on is our staffing. And Ms. Mahaffey had asked Mr. Matillo about this, I believe some other board members too. Have the financial incentives that we have offered filled the demand that we have for staff.
AJ, what do you have any feedback right now on what fill rates have looked like? But we've only got the last couple of weeks that we've been remote, and there's been less demand. So, AJ, do you have any?
Yeah, the fill rates for the last couple of weeks have been really strong due to, the reduced need. We're looking at unfilled absences of 2, and 7 over the last couple of days, but that's not a predictor of when we return to face-to-face. I shared some data that the interest is definitely up. People are signing up, knowing that our focus is on in-person. One piece of data I didn't share that I've looked at since is our applications are also up. We talked about interest, but actually completing the application. All of January last year, for example, 2020, we had 79 new sub-applications. This year so far, we have 176, and we're only halfway through January. So that's another positive indicator. Again, Mr. Haggerty, it's really hard to answer that question right now, other than to say we do have some data points that are showing that we're closing that gap.
Thank you, Dr. Mattilla. So we're closing the gap, and I know that we haven't had vacancies to fill over the holiday season or while we've been maybe all remote, but in terms of projections, being able to project out the number of substitutes we needed when we're in face-to-face instruction. Are we there yet? Do we need more? What's your confidence that we'll have that gap filled when face-to-face was scheduled to return?
Certainly, if we continue to see the daily interest that we're getting now, I'm much more confident that we can close that gap and have what we need. It would be good to just see another week to see the continued interest, the applications coming in, orientation numbers, but we are certainly, on the right track.
Okay, thank you. Now, we did get this letter from our principals that is asking for a delay of face-to-face instruction, staying in remote instruction through third quarter. Now, I'm not advocating that. I don't think I could support that. But I do want to address the concerns that they identified. They say in this letter, even if we solve the substitute shortage, we must consider the integrity of our classroom instruction, and if simply having supervision is in the best interest of our students' academic needs. This is especially seen with our secondary schools, which all have courses that are being taught with both in-person and virtual students. Given complexities of hybrid teaching, a substitute or other staff member covering a class will not provide the necessary rigor to support student achievement. So, for example, there was a letter from a doctor, I think some of you, an MD, maybe some of you have gotten, practices sports medicine, works in our schools, who was talking about how important it was to come back for face-to-face instruction, but also said that it needed to be rigorous instruction and not simply completing the same assignment you would complete in online school, but in a classroom. What do you think our capacity is for rigorous, legitimate online instruction, and are these staffing needs they've identified a real concern?
In my conversations with principals, what that refers to is that if you're fully face-to-face, which you can't do for grades 6 through 12 right now, versus fully virtual or in rotations, that rotations not only gives you, it gives you more face-to-face time than virtual does, but perhaps less integrity of instruction because you're splitting across different cohorts where some of your kids are in person and some of them are virtual, and the teacher may be handling both of those as well as any that are virtual academy. That when they're all virtual, it is one method of delivery for the content for the teacher. And I think that's what they're talking about in terms of instruction versus supervision. And so that is preferable to rotations. They get more access to the teacher in virtual than in rotations.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Sutton, I'll conclude really feeling almost as if I've gone in a circle, because we have legitimate concerns, we have legitimate needs. I know that The information presented to me from the ABC Collaborative, I believe, is very persuasive, but I understand that a lot of our staff may not feel that way. And in order to have face-to-face instruction, in order to have remote instruction, we have to have professional certified staff. And I do have worries that if we don't have the vaccinations, if our staff is worried about the community spread, is worried about the community rates, we could lose staff. Right now in North Carolina, we don't have enough certified teachers to meet demand. We compete with other counties, and we offer a lot of wonderful benefits and good, comparably better pay here in Wake County. But with demand all over the state and other districts, will we lose teachers to counties that stay in full remote? Will we lose teachers to counties that have the vaccine? Or will some just plan to retire or leave the system? Ms. Cash had said, we have a lot of questions, and we need to know more. And so, as we ponder all these things from, how we address the isolation needs of our students to how we fill the classrooms with, staff that are there and willing and feel confident in their safety. Those are going to drive my vote tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hagerty. Every single board member here has either has or has had a student in the Wake County Public School System. I say that to say that we are all not just board members, but every single one of us are parents as well. And so what everyone has shared today I think are their honest, genuine, sincere feelings and thoughts that are not necessarily based in scientific data, that are not political, but personal. Real personal, honest feelings. I myself have two daughters, one senior at Enloe, who by most accounts has done pretty well these last 2 semesters. AB Honor Roll last spring, on track to be AB Honor Roll. This year has been accepted, and now at 4 of her top 5 or 6 colleges that she wishes to attend has been accepted, so she is doing well in this virtual environment. My oldest daughter, senior at North Carolina A&T State University, made the dean's list last semester. First time in her college career making a dean's list. I share that not to brag, to say that unfortunately that is not the reality for many of our students. And that is what bothers me. I don't worry about too much my own, but I worry about the many students who are not faring well, who are struggling by not being in school. Our high school students especially, who at this point have not seen the inside of a building or had face-to-face instruction in 10 months. And if we consider going another month or 2 or go all the way to June, it will be 15 months that they have not received any face-to-face instruction. And that really bothers me, as I'm sure it does every single member at this table and our superintendent. So I can tell you that it is the will, the wish, the desire of this board to get our students back into school. I, for one, feel like if we can do it, which we think we can, and we can do it safely, and I don't care if it's in a 3-week cohort rotation, 2-week cohort rotation, if we think we can do it safely, then I think we owe it to those students to try. I think we owe it to those students to at least give it a shot. And I can tell you, as chair of this board, I'll be the first to admit and to say, if we can't do it, if we're struggling, if students and everyone else don't want to be compliant, and they're so happy to see each other that they're running at each other and hugging and kissing and shaking hands and doing everything else, then I'll be the first to say, hey, get them out of there. Abort mission. It's not working. Pull them out. But in my core, I feel like we owe them a shot. We owe them a chance to see if we can do it. Because we don't know. We don't know if we can do it or not, to be honest. As we've said time and time and time and time and time and time again, we don't know. This is a pandemic. This is the first time we have ever, this is unprecedented, and all the other overused words. But we got to try. And I'm certain, as you said, Mr. Hegarty, our students, our parents, community is tired of this circle. Make up your minds. What is the board going to do? And I can tell you what, if we're honest, what we're doing. We're trying to buy some time. A few more weeks, a few more days, a few more months, so that we don't close the door on the opportunity to get kids back in school. And if we can buy a little bit more time and get some vaccinations going, buy a little bit more time and get our sub rate up, buy a little bit more time and see if the rates go down a little bit, then we can finally get kids back into school. To your point, Mr. Hegarty, we haven't said that. But if you look at our actions and look what we're doing, that's exactly what we're doing. So I know people think, well, we're all over the place. They can't make a decision. What are we going to do? Because we're trying to figure out a way to get kids back in school. And if we can do it and do it safely. And not just our students, but our employees and faculty too. But we know too, as Ms. Johnson-Hosser said, people are scared. And it's not just our teachers now, our principals, as you've heard, are expressing grave concern. And when you look at what is happening around in our communities, we all hear it on the news every single night. We are now at levels in our community that are unprecedented. We have not seen this level of spread. We have not seen this number of cases. We have not seen this number of hospitalizations. As Mr. Hegarty said, you talk to doctors now and they're saying, I don't know. And that's where we are. Can we honestly feel safe and secure and confident about sending our students, our employees, back into the building on January 20th, as we had planned? Tough. As Ms. Johnson-Hosser said, if that's your student, if that's your mother, if that's your wife, if that's your husband, your spouse, and that's what we are faced with, making a decision. It is my hope that as we look at mid-February, and even this is tough, but that we either jump in and take a leap of faith or not. Because I do think our community is tired of going around in a circle. And if we're going to get back in school and send our students back to school, I think at the end of this 30-day or so waiting period, then let's make the commitment to do it. Our teachers, our principals, our central office staff has put in a ton of work over the last weeks and months preparing our schools to make sure that we can do this safely. I, for one, would like to honor that work. that so many of our hardworking employees all across this district have put in to making sure that we have protocols and procedures and PPE and cleaning solutions and stickers on the wall and on the floor and everything else that we see in our schools, trying to make sure that they are safe places for a return. Again, we're not sure if we could do it, but we think we can. I've got the confidence that I think we can. And we're smart enough to recognize when we're not, that we're falling short. So it's my hope that as we ponder this decision, that when mid-February comes, that we are ready to make a decision one way or the other. And I hope that that is that we decide to go back and give our students the opportunity that they so richly deserve for all students and figure it out. Superintendent Moore.
So I did want to go back to a couple of comments that were made about decision processes moving forward, and if we could talk a little bit about that. There's actually an additional slide I wanted to go through. So, should the board choose to delay a return to in-person instruction, we do have a framework that we want to use to decide in February for recommending resuming classroom instruction. I just want to go through that a little bit. This is a slide from earlier in the presentation that we've used quite a bit since the fall. It's offered here so that school board, parents, general public are aware of what the information is that we are tracking. There is no single metric or measure that determines when we will return. All three of the categories are reviewed and weighed according to the importance of the data that's available at the time. For example, if the governor issues an executive order that places all schools in Plan C, the information in the other categories doesn't matter. The same is true if DHHS were to tell all schools to move to remote. Based on past guidance from the governor and DHHS, we don't expect that type of a recommendation coming. However, executive orders and guidance from DHHS must be considered when making a school district decision. State and local health data, the second category in this framework, will also be considered. Again, no single number, but the first 10 months of this pandemic have provided us a range within each indicator so that we've seen what those numbers look like as we move forward and continue to work. For example, if the percent of positive cases topped 20% in Wake County and hospitals were full, this indicator would have a different effect on our decision than a stable or declining rate in the single digits and little concern about hospital capacity. And if those conditions existed, it likely wouldn't matter if the governor had issued an executive order that moved all North Carolina schools to Plan C. This category is also a natural fit for the county alert system that DHHS began issuing last month. The third category looks at the district's operational capabilities, such as the ability to find substitutes when staff are absent due to COVID-19 infections, quarantines, or other reasons. The decisions by parents about whether to send their children, regardless of whether to sign up for virtual academy or in-person instruction, is also considered in this category, which is something that we saw more of just before the break. Again, there's no single measure that can be derived from these areas or contained within any of these three areas, but they will be used to decide when in-person instruction can return. All three will be used, and given the weight that's needed based on what's going on with the data, the circumstances, and information in each. Again, by example, if the governor closes school buildings or there are not enough teachers to deliver instruction, that clearly matters more than whether our positive rate is at 5, 10, or 15. On the other hand, if our positive rates exceed 10%, but the governor's placed no restrictions on in-person classes, we have staff available, and secondary transmission on campus is low, that would produce a different debate. We dearly wish this decision could be reduced to a single number or a single formula, but we have found over and over again that much of what is happening in response to this pandemic is beyond the control of schools. At the same time, we are not willing to simply concede that in-person instruction can wait. We know it is important. We desperately want students to return safely to in-person instruction. The result of that desire is this framework for decisions, not a formula, that requires an abundant amount of effort and patience, which we know is wearing thin, on the part of families, staff, and school system leaders. We wish this were not the case, but we want the public to know that this is the framework that we are using for deciding for when we believe it's safe to return to in-person instruction. Thank you.
Superintendent Moore, two questions with respect to that. One, what would be the pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages to taking those indicators and looking at them district-wide versus school by school, or even region by region or district by district? Yeah.
That's hard to answer because it depends on all of those different divisions that you just talked about, and it's not a manner in which we've contemplated making decisions about the district. So I would want to go back to our team to discuss what would a framework for that type of decision making take a look like. If we looked at this for individual schools or regions or levels, even, there's a number of different ways to slice it. But I would need to go back to our folks and take a look at that, at how we would contemplate doing that.
And I'll acknowledge we've never, to my knowledge, we've never made decisions like that as a system, or as a district.
Right.
It's sort of all or none. We're a system, and so that would be a strange place for us to be, or extraordinary place for us to be. But these are extraordinary times, and so and I'm sure people are asking and wondering that question: that could it be that that framework might allow some flexibility in that regard? And like I said, that's not something that we typically or generally want to contemplate as a system. But I'm sure that that's a question that's out there. Ms. Cash.
I have two questions for the superintendent. So I did think we had asked for a framework for schools to do different things at their schools that might be different, that we could see if some schools could stay open. So I think we had talked about that, or at least I had. Maybe I was the only one, but I think we had talked about it. So I would like to see that. My question, Superintendent Moore, is the revised number 2 grades, with grades 4 and 5 and a 3 cohort rotation. And I think that was the only change. It was a 6 through 12 still in a 3 cohort rotation, and K3 in full time. My question is why, I still don't see why we cannot do that, because I didn't see a lot of barriers to that in what has come on this slide on number 9.
You're talking about for 4th and 5th grade, the 3 options that we reviewed with school-based principals?
Yeah, because it was like still leaving everything else the same, but bringing the 4, 5 in on a 3-week rotation instead of all in. And at 9, you list the advantages and disadvantages, and I don't think there were that many disadvantages to do it.
So the first choice for principals for in-person instruction, if we're going to have it for 4th and 5th grade, was to keep 4th and 5th grade in rotations. So, and then the second actually was full-on Plan A. Third was the option of redistributing students and redistributing staff, that was a greater hardship. Some schools felt comfortable doing it, but more schools felt like that was a hardship that they didn't want to take on in terms of redistribution. And some of them had really creative ways to try to do it, but they would, and might do it anyway if they were in a Plan A and all 4th and 5th graders were in. But as a system-level decision, there was higher support for rotations in grades 4 and 5.
So our principals felt like they could not do this, starting on Wednesday, that we had to wait, that they could not do this. I'm surprised at our principals, but I just,
Well, I think that you're going to find within, just like you find within our teachers, there are teachers who support being all remote, and there are teachers who support being back in person. You're going to find building level leaders, principals and assistant principals on all sides of that as well. The recommendation that came to us from the division that has a number of principals and assistant principals, that recommendation from the division was that we remain in remote.
and that was based on most of our principals not wanting the children back in the school during this time. I'm saying during this time, so
Yeah.
I want to be clear on what principals are saying.
I just
because-
think it's the concern of the metrics at this time in the community. That's what's driving that.
Oh, and then my last question. It's not a question, but I'm going to actually say this, because if our governor wants us to close our schools for safety, then I feel like this governor needs to give us the vaccine to vaccinate our teachers. I don't feel like that can be, they should close the schools but not give us a vaccine. I'm just going to say that. I just had to. Sorry.
Dr. Martin.
So I'd just like to, again, make a comment that as we don't want to make a permanent decision because we don't want the pandemic to be here permanently, right? It's a community effort, it's a school effort, it's an all-in effort that has to get this thing under control. As we think about how are we going to come back, which is the next steps, and I appreciate the principles of this framework, I do still think it needs to be fleshed out with information so that both we as board members and the community can sort of know, put a little bit more flesh on these principles. I think the principles are the right ones. But as we plan to go back, there's lots of people say that there's debate about the science. It reminds me a lot of people saying about debate about climate change. There is no debate about the science that you need to wash, you need to wear masks, and you need to wait at appropriate distances. There are people who try to make a debate over the amount of distance, and the people doing that are talking about a linear distance, and viruses don't walk in a straight line. They don't do that. So you have to look at the population density in a given space. So even when we talk about 20 children in a classroom, well, what's the size of that classroom? That will matter. So what I will ask for is not, as you have said, Mr. Sutton, when we make the next decision, we need to plan to reopen. We need to right now be starting to say, when we can reopen, how are we going to ensure that all 3 W's are in place? Right? Ms. Cash told us about the vaccinations. We're not going to turn a switch. The end of January, end of February, end of March, and all of a sudden, voila, everybody's vaccinated. And as everybody is saying, is even after the vaccination takes place, we're still going to need to take these precautions. And so I am asking that we start now with careful planning. I've said from the beginning, I thought we could be more in person, but we're going to have to stand up different strategies to do so. But let's start now for planning. How are we going to reopen that actually does pay attention to masks, washing, and distance? Let's not wait till the week of to say, will this work? Will this not work? Let's start now to honor all 3 W's, because you can debate all kinds of other things. But every report that has even close to scientific credibility that I have seen comes back to, if those 3 W's are rigorously adhered to, it can be safe. Now, most have a qualifier. The community spread has to be in check on top of that. But even those that don't have the qualifier still have all 3 W's. That's not a point of question. So as we plan, let's start now to figure out strategies that will rigorously adhere to all 3 W's. Thank you.
Superintendent Moore, as we're talking about the framework, and I'm looking at my calendar, so I just want to sort of hash this out a little bit, board members, before we get to the vote, and I'll try to do a couple of questions too. What I see, we have next week's meeting on the 19th of this month. Then we have a meeting on February 2nd. And then we are at mid-February with a meeting on February 16th, which would mean if we're sticking to our current meeting schedule, we would need to be making a decision either on the 16th, and if we're giving folks some, and if we're making a decision on the 16th, it was something that might start as early as
The 22nd.
the 22nd, or if we're making a decision somewhere on the 2nd with implementation somewhere around mid-February, which will be Monday, February the 15th. So I guess my question is, what would you need in order to get to that point? And board members, what do you need from staff over the next few weeks and 2 meetings in order that we might make a decision, either making a decision at mid-February or for implementation around mid-February? Does that make sense? Does my question make sense?
Yes, I'm glad you're there because that's what I want to talk about. I think that needs to be sort of a part of what our next steps are.
Yeah, I don't want to get to the 16th and then we're asking for stuff from staff and then trying to make a decision, to Dr. Martin's point, for the last minute. And we, whether you feel like we have a framework or not, I think everyone feels like in your head, and I've heard in your statements, what you feel like you would need to be able to comfortably make a decision, whichever way.
And I would just say that in order to implement a proposed return on like the 15th or 22nd, that we would want a board decision a week prior, which would be either the 9th or the 16th. You don't currently have a meeting scheduled for the 9th, but I think those are what we're talking about. Otherwise, we're looking at a decision, right. Otherwise, because after that, you're in March, so.
So before I go to board members, is there anything that you feel like you would need, other than just direction from the board?
I think it's direction from the board here on if we're contemplating a return on the 15th or the 22nd, and then sort of the corresponding week before Tuesday.
Okay. Ms. Krishna, I saw your hand, and then Ms. Scott, and then Ms. Cash, I'll come to you. I know you already had your hand up to say something, but in
And I
that...
think just one last point, because given the time that we want to give the week, if we can, to our families, the amount of time that you have between now and when you're looking at data to really provide time for trends to change and shift and that sort of thing. So,
Because I think, too, if we're honest, 30 days is not a lot of time. That's not a lot of time. And whether we're talking about vaccinations, positivity rate, we probably, if we're honest, won't see a whole lot of change in 30 days. I would almost posit that things may look worse in 30 days than we see any improvement. So I think, again, we need to be prepared in some regard to be able to make an informed decision one way or the other. So anyway, Ms. Kushner.
Well, thank you, and thank you to all my colleagues and for your comments today. It's really helped me a lot just to talk this through. This has not been clear, as you've well said. There's not been a lot of clarity, but I do think I hope one thing that improves in a week or two is the staffing issue. I was really glad to hear Dr. Matillo's update and the uptick in substitute teachers. There's a lot of goodwill in our community around supporting our school system and our school's children and our teachers. There's been a lot of divisiveness, but there's also been a lot of goodwill. So I would hope that in the coming even week or so, that should be a positive change. And the three pressures that we're feeling around staffing, the high prevalence of COVID, and the rollout of the vaccines. That's one thing I do hope improves. I would hope that Ms. Cash, I know I don't often want you to be wrong, but I hope she's wrong about the pessimism around the vaccine. I hope that.
Maybe I will be after today.
Well, I hope we find out more. I mean, sincerely, because that is a critical factor in the return, a safe return to school. I had a couple clarifying questions. One was, I thought that on the last meeting we did get a framework for when a classroom or a grade level or a school would close. So we do have a framework around that, correct, Superintendent Moore?
For when we are in person instruction, yes.
And when we're in person instruction. And then second, I wanted to get some clarity around IEP evaluations and meetings. And from special education staff, I understand that since we've gone remote, those have not been in the building. So I would just like some information around how we're going to make sure we do start doing that work for students who need support for their IEPs and special education. So I would want that information in the coming meeting.
If I could just add on specifically for assessments for students who are waiting
Yes.
to get assessed for a 504 or an IEP in remote. I know ongoing IEP meetings are continuing, but that assessment piece that's critical to implementing it is.
Thank you for clarifying that for me, Ms. Mahaffey. I appreciate that. And so I appreciate the comments today, and I'll listen to.
Thank you. Mrs. Scott?
Thank you. One of the things I'd love to see, I just have a few questions, and I appreciate my colleagues asking for something tangible. I think that's, and as Ms. Moore, Superintendent Moore said, that's a frustration that we don't have that. We don't have, like, this is the number, boom, boom. That's everyone's frustration, and I recognize that's not going to happen, but still, with the framework, as much tangible information we can provide for why the decision is one way or the other is really helps. It helps us all. I'd also, just as a general ask, I'd love to see some updated information, some additional information on the COVID landing site for mental health support for our students. There are some great videos there that are COVID specific. There is a link to a phone number, but I think if we could just provide some more updated information about resources for families, because we do recognize the impact this is having. I know our partners in Wake County government have information on their webpage, but if we could have a direct link, I think that would be great, or age appropriate information to add to that. And I know it just, excuse me, again, either working to provide options for testing, COVID testing for employees, and perhaps even making it available to families for students if possible. I know a lot of us have seen in the news that Miami-Dade School District, one of the largest school districts in the country, has been open since October. We've had some amount of being open since October as well, but they've also rolled out a big testing program so that they have concrete numbers to work with to help guide their choice, their decision making in terms of spread in the schools and continuing. I appreciate the efforts of the health department and our Wake County Public Schools Health Department in rolling out information to employees if there's been an exposure, taking special considerations to staff who travel between schools. And anything we can do, Roxy, we can call up the governor together, because we do have to have our teachers, they need to have that they need to have access to the vaccine. They just do. I mean, full stop. We have got to have that available. So anything we can do to help, that's something that they have the ability and the authority to do, and I hope that they hear us. I think that was I think those were my biggest questions about helping decision making from here on out. Thank you.
Ms. Carter?
All right, thank you. Well, I would just like to ask, I asked staff earlier, but I would really appreciate a survey being sent out to all of our school staff, all of them. And I would like I really want to get feedback on not only their safety, but their willingness to come in and provide in-person instruction, because I do think it is important that we give something directly sent to every single staff member. And because I think that I would like to consider that in my decision-making. Additionally, I know we had previously.
And is that information around perceptions of safety of all employees? Is that?
Right, and any concerns that they may have, and also specifically their willingness to come in and provide in-person instruction, or if they are, we have school staff that are coming to the building even when students aren't there, so they're willing even to do that. I would just like to see more specific and widespread inclusive information. And then the other part, kind of piggybacking on some other conversations we had at previous board meetings, I would like to have the follow-up, and it might be being planned already, for about the lunch, snack, and any unmasked times, any changes to those guidance. I know it varied school to school and some concerns around that. So just kind of more specific information about how that's going to be addressed.
You should be getting that. We'll be sending it to principals, schools, and the board very shortly.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. And that's it. And for the vaccine, I'm just hoping that all school staff can be priority. I did see just a few hours ago they have changed, according to Dr. Cohen. She confirmed that North Carolina teachers and other frontline and essential workers will now have to wait until people ages 65 to 74 get vaccinated. So this is a huge concern. So, and this is a government, a North Carolina governor level decision.
It's a
Correct?
federal
Or federal
requirement. Yep.
Federal, and so they are now changing all of that. So the emails, can be sent to us, but also we ask please to contact outside of here, because we need everyone we can. We will do our part, I'm sure, but the state and the federal, and pushing anything that we can. Thank you.
Ms. Cash?
Well, I do just want to clarify, too, that I'm not asking that teachers get put in front of the greater than 75 or greater than 65 now. That is, but I think there's enough vaccine to do both, and I just think Wake County needs to get what they need. So I'm not saying put the educators necessarily in front. I just want to clarify that, because somebody told me I'd probably get thrown under the bus for that. We are going to get the question about percent of children not engaging in online learning. Was that one of the questions?
We're working on how to get at that information. Attendance is not an easy way to do it because of the issues we've had with Power School attendance all year. So we're working on how to figure that. And we may have to go directly to teachers to ask about it.
I would probably think that's. And then one last question. Are we assuming, we're still having a recommendation. We have not voted on the recommendation, so we have not decided that we're going to wait till February.
Correct.
We'll take a vote next.
Correct. We don't need to
Tuesday.
finalize the conversation I just talked about a minute ago in terms of timeline until we know that we're doing something.
Thank you.
Ms. Mahaffey?
I appreciate everything that my colleagues have said. I think it would be impactful over the next couple board meetings while we anticipate this return and this decision to normalize the slide that you shared with us, Superintendent Moore, that is that framework. And if we can fill that in maybe with where we are on that day, just so we have a point in time as we move forward and can reference back to previous board meetings. I know we all have the ability to access the dashboard, but just so that is fresh in our mind at the top of every board meeting, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
And Ms. Cash, I was also not suggesting that. I just wanted to make that clear. But I do have,
We're all here for the advocacy. Just call us. We'll do a call to the governor.
I do have teacher friends in other states who have already received their first dose of the vaccine. Yeah.
Dr. Martin.
Thank you. And I think it's an important question to ask, what do we need for making a decision? I wish I could put vaccine on the list. The reality is that, to have that a yes or no would be not possible. That's very unfortunate. We need to keep working at that. But if I take that off, what I need is a plan that rigorously adheres to all 3 Ws. I need a sustained decline in infection prevalence. I'd like us to look at infection prevalence more than testing rate, because I'd still love to see testing increase, right? Everybody should be tested once a week. And if we did that, we would see the testing go down, we hope. But I think what's most important is the prevalence. And you can easily do this by looking at the total number of cases and weight it based on the census population. That's not that hard to do. And so particularly the decline in infection prevalence that I need to see is in the student cohort, student age cohort, and the staff age cohort. So we just need to see the prevalence of infection going down. We haven't talked about it. There's some emails about it. I had sort of hoped we'd get some briefing on it, but I would also need to see a real structure in place for staff medical accommodations. I'd like to hear an update on that, because we're getting all kinds of emails that this or that was removed or wasn't removed. What are the criteria? I mean, it can't just be open that says, I'm worried, therefore I need an accommodation, but we're getting cases where there are pretty clear letters from physicians indicating real medical needs. So I don't know what the process is, but I'd like to see a very clear and consistent across schools structure for staff medical accommodations. So those are my big 3. I'd also like to comment that I'd like us to think about potentially not an all or nothing kind of decision. We've sort of done elements of that, but I don't think we've ever treated it as robustly as we've occasionally talked about. I think we need to think about it in a little bit of a triage sense. We've talked about this to some degree, that our youngest, our pre-K through 3, sitting in front of the screen is the least ideal. I'm not saying it's ideal for anybody, but I think it's the least ideal for pre-K through 3. I think many of our special education children, it's least ideal. That's probably part of our triaging. Whatever the triaging is, we need to think about that rather than trying to necessarily make comprehensive decisions. Some of that's related to the governor's order, some of it's not. The other thing I'd like us to think about in terms of not all or nothing is a lot of what we hear is the primary need for the in-person. It's not the only, but a primary need is the social emotional connection. And I'd like us to, again, be creative in thinking about that, because the social emotional connection does not necessarily mean 7 hours in a classroom, where you have a lot of people in a small, relatively small, confined space. So potentially, we could create, say, weekly events in stadiums, in parking lots, you name it. I'm not saying this is the solution. I don't have a solution. I think, a lot of our schools were extremely creative in how they dealt with graduation and senior events, for example, last spring. But I really do not believe that it needs to be an all or nothing decision. I believe that should infection rates continue to climb, we hope they don't, but they easily may, we still need to address the social and emotional connections. How are we going to do that? I do think that there are ways to address that element independent from 7 hours a day in a classroom. And so I'd like us to start thinking in that direction. That's not an all or nothing for my vote, but it is, I believe, a way to address kind of both of our needs of safety in classrooms and addressing the social and emotional component that schools provide. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson-Hosler.
I mean, several of my colleagues have stated things that I certainly agree with that I'd like to see. And I think the only kind of, which we've talked about before, and it's back to the all or nothing, and that is, which I feel like we're still on audio repeat, so staff can totally tune this out and do nothing with it because it is an audio repeat. But that is, are there other options other than the current rotation that we're using? I can't remember. Another board member used the example, but I certainly had some parents, because, when I looked at my own daughter's schedule, she was in Plan B, and I was like, oh, she would be there that many weeks, technically speaking, because of the rotation. But for some of our students who need the connection to be able to have their education click in their heads, and of course, we've seen other districts and we've seen other school systems do it, and that is, which we talked about earlier, is revisit once or twice a week versus the 2 to 3 week rotation. We keep saying we have to revisit all these options that are all or nothing. We are a large district, and there are a lot of moving parts. And so, of course, if I had to rank them, I'd like for people to be vaccinated. I'm here for that conversation, Ms. Cash. I also think it's going to be important, and, Dr. Martin, what I've heard, and I'm clearly not a scientist, so I'd rarely repeat what I've heard, but that is, I do think that we should encourage, until we can really ensure that we can support this, is to have our folks in our buildings get tested, because the more tests you take, the more likely you are to get positive, but then you actually have a normalized rate. And right now we actually don't have that, because we don't really know that people who aren't being tested, whether they have COVID or not, that may be asymptomatic. And so I also think that there's some advocacy we can be considering, by we, I mean the board, around testing for our folks to really figure out if we can help normalize our own rates for our schools, because then we're actually really talking about our own data, which aligns to the conversations we've heard from the ABC Collaborative, which I've continuously pushed back on. That's great, but those are very small schools. And so I do think there might be some help as we're waiting on the vaccine, hopefully not as long as next year, but that we actually also put into place asking our folks to get tested to create a normalized rate of where we are, honestly, for those of us who would be in buildings.
I know you hate this.
Wait a
I'm
minute,
sorry.
Wait a minute.
Go ahead.
Did you have a question, Mr. Hager?
Only just to add that, I would just reiterate that we want to see what our staffing levels look like, and that we do have adequate staff. These incentives and other things are working, and so that we can offer, if we're coming back face to face, that we can offer those classes with reliability, and it not be a day-to-day thing where we don't know if we have staff to cover classes. And then the second thing is, I'd like to see more data from the ABC Collaborative. One of the things that has been said is that some of the early studies they did were when infection rates were low. But if they have districts that still have face-to-face instruction with these higher rates, I'd like to see that data. And so let's see what those higher rates have meant in those schools. And so I'd like to hear from them again if we can.
I think your earlier point to get information on student failure, the Ds and Fs, I hope you got that one, Superintendent Moore. Thank you. It's important data.
Mrs. Cash?
So principals didn't feel like they could still keep their pre-K 3 in with the staff that they have if they put the others in?
So we did not, when we were talking to principals, we were talking specifically about grades 4 and 5. The feedback from principals about returning to remote was led by the division and the work that they do with principals and assistant principals. We didn't ask, when we asked about grades 4 and 5, it was with the assumption that K3 was in person daily like it had been. And they were only offering, every single elementary principal was only offering specific information about grades 4 and 5.
Okay, because I'd heard from some of the principals that they were never asked about K3 and they felt like they were going well. And so we're not taking them out then?
What do you mean?
Why would we take them out if it was going well?
The staff recommendation is for all pre-K through 12 students. And certainly there can and should be board discussion if there is desire to slice that differently.
Okay, so we could vote on one group of kids going back as they have been, and because I had heard that they hadn't been asked that question. Okay,
That's correct.
thank you.
That's correct. And I think one of the last times that we did this, you did in fact split it up by grade levels.
Thank you, Superintendent.
All right, seeing no further questions or discussions, can I ask for a motion either in support or not in support of the recommendation from staff to keep all students from pre-K to 12 to remain in remote learning through mid-February?
Were we going to vote on that today? I didn't know we were voting on that today. We are? Oh, I had told people we weren't. So I'm sorry. I thought this was a work session. Well, it's a special call board meeting now that I pay attention, but I am paying attention.
We know you are.
Well, I mean, so this information we're asking for is only to give us information to stay closed till a specific February? So we're...
No, the information that we were just sharing is to help determine what we will do upon returning in mid-February. But the vote now is with regard to what the plan is for the beginning of second semester, starting next week, January 20th, until what is now being proposed in mid-February, how we would basically start out the second semester.
So I entertain a motion, since the K-3 had not been a problem, to keep the pre-K-3, to keep them, that's my motion, if that's okay to entertain one before another one's made, that the pre-K to 3 be kept in full-time. Can I do that?
Tell me again what you're asking for. You're asking for pre-K3 to stay in
full-time, since I'm not sure that anybody had felt that was not working well. I think that's what I just asked the superintendent was, could this motion be broken into different votes?
So
is that what I asked you, Superintendent Moore?
Yeah, and let me see if Jonathan's on, because I want to ask him a question.
I mean, parliamentarily, Ms. Cash has made a motion. If it either needs to be seconded and can be voted on, or if it doesn't have a second, then it moves on. But she has made a motion, and I think we do have to honor the motion.
I mean, I didn't hear a motion. I mean, I heard her saying she would like to make, she was asking if she could.
I said I would like to make a motion. I'm pretty sure I said that.
Okay, go ahead.
And if I could just
I would support that. It's I know the complexity in that's the current state of affairs is that pre-K through K3 is scheduled to to be in Plan A starting with January 20th. So in a way, Ms. Cash is not really asking for a change to what the current scheduled plan is. But given that this topic of in-person is under review and a potential action item, I think it's a motion that could be entertained at this point, that she's asked to return essentially to the in-person, I guess, starting January 20th for Plan A for pre-K through third grade. So I think that's a motion that can be entertained.
All right, so Ms. Cash has made a motion to
keep
to maintain the board's current plan and keeping K3, pre-K to 3 in its current status that the board already decided, which is face-to-face instruction on a daily basis. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Cash, second by Mrs. Carter, to maintain the board's current plan for second semester instruction, which is for pre-K through 3 to stay in Plan A, which is face-to-face daily instruction. Is there any discussion? Mr. Hagerty.
Yes, this is a question for Superintendent Moore. Superintendent Moore, when you brought forward this staff proposal, did you see any difference in grade levels for this recommendation that everyone return to remote instruction for this period? Did staff evaluate that pre-K through 3 would not have these difficulties, or that middle school or high school, the kids that have been out almost a year, I mean, are the conditions worse for them than they are for pre-K through 3? Could you just speak to that?
Right. So the recommendation for all students, pre-K-12, regional program, EC students, for all students to remain remote through mid-February was based on what we were seeing in the community metrics and the concerns associated with that. So it would apply to all grade levels. But Ms. Cash is correct that the feedback that was sought from principals was specifically about 4th and 5th grade and not directly addressing K-3, where we had seen some positive things happening while they were in face-to-face. But the recommendation from the staff encompasses all grade levels because of the metric applies to the entire community.
So just by follow-up, are we seeing any of the staffing problems that we've cited at the pre-K through 3 level, or are they doing better than everybody else?
I think that elementary schools have struggled with staffing and subs at an equal rate as middle school has. Of course, high school has not been in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Mrs. Cash?
Well, and again, the fact that I realized that they hadn't asked the principals about the K-3 that was already in, I would prefer for the 4th or 5th, of course, to be in. I would certainly prefer for them to be in on a rotation. But that was the question that was specifically asked to the principals, and therefore that we got the direct feedback about that. But then it did concern me that I'd heard from a few principals that the K-3, they hadn't been asked about that, and it would seem to be working. So that's my only reason for breaking that out separately. That's my only reason. I care about the 4th, 5th, middle school, high school. I care about them all the same. I just know it hadn't been asked.
I will note that in the Division of Principals letter, it does break down with K-3, and their concern is based on the community spread metrics that they recommend remote instruction in their letter, that they highlight those grade levels. But I also hear what you're saying.
I did see that in the letter, but that's why I asked if it was actually in the survey, because I got the impression it was not from a few principals. So I just wanted to clarify, but I did see it. You're right, it was in the letter. I don't know if they asked.
Dr. Martin?
Thank you. I will be voting no on this motion. As we have heard from many teachers, we have not yet even had a commitment to the appropriate social distancing in our pre-K to 3. We're in better shape because of the K-3 class size legislation, but we've been sent pictures, and we've seen many cases where we've not yet committed to that social distance, which I believe is absolutely critical. Secondly, I went back to the spreadsheet just to check to see if the pre-K-3 cohort was different than the middle and high school cohorts. The health department breaks things out in 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and 15 to 17-year-olds. The 5 to 9, which is the pre-K to 3 rate, in the week of January 3 had an infection prevalence of 2.5 per 1,000. In October 25th, the week of October 25th, had an infection rate of 0.38 per 1,000. So that's a 6.6 times increase compared to the full 5th through 17th increase, which was 6.7 times increase. So we haven't seen any less increase in the infection prevalence for the pre-K-3 children as we have for the whole group. So I don't believe that there is really a different safety issue for our pre-K to 3. I understand the issue of sitting in front of a screen. That's why I would love to see us triage and come up with plans with real social distancing, because we need to address this issue. I don't disagree with that at all, but we're not there at this time. We do not have a commitment to social distance, and we do not see we have not seen a lower increase in the infection prevalence of that cohort compared to any of the other of our school cohorts.
However, our class sizes are smaller, and there are a lot of schools making this work well. And if we have to be autonomous at this point and let those schools function, because their class sizes are smaller than 4 or 5, then I don't know ones that don't. This is where then I think we need to, I think pre-K-3 can be in because of the class size. It's all through that detail that I'm looking at, and I, you know, I don't know ones that don't. This is where then I think we need to, I think K-3 can be in because of the class size. It's all through that detail that I'm looking at, and I, you know, I don't know ones that don't. This is where then I think we need to, I think K-3 can be in because of the class size. It's all through that detail that I'm looking at, and I, We have seen some pictures where they're not, but I've been to a lot of classrooms where they are. So that's my point, I guess.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to maintain the board's previous decision for second semester opening with keeping K3 in Plan A, all those in favor, show by sign of aye.
Aye.
All those in favor, all opposed, nay?
Nay.
Nays have it, that motion fails.
So I have a second motion.
Chair,
Can I recognize Ms. Scott?
I'm sorry. I just
Sorry,
wanted to.
yeah, please do.
I just wanted to, for clarity, I don't know if it would be helpful for media if we do a roll call vote for that. I'm not sure, or if you were about to share who voted. I'm sure that members of the public are curious, and they might not have been able to.
So that, it was, looked to me that motion failed on a vote of 2-7, Mrs. Cash and Mrs. Carter in favor of the motion. The remaining 7 board members were against.
Can I make a motion?
Mrs. Cash.
Again, considering the fact that these younger kids are struggling online, I would make a motion that those schools that can socially distance their kids, because here, I'm trying to take care of what Dr. Martin is concerned about, rightfully so, that they can go ahead and open.
Your motion is for those schools that can socially distance, that they go ahead and open. Is that the motion? And how do we know is there a list of the schools that can?
We would have to poll all of our principals to determine which schools are able to, in a Plan A format, because that's what you're talking about, right? In a Plan A format, ensure what I believe is being asked for, which is the recommended 6 foot of social distancing, which I think a good number can, but not all. And I would just ask for some clarification on that motion. Are you asking for anything for those that are not able to? Would they just be in remote, or would they be in rotations?
Well, I guess they well, if I have a choice here now, I would say those that can would be in person full-time. Those that cannot would be in a rotation. To me, that's still getting to the kids the best way we can. I'm trying to figure out every way that we could do that.
If I could interject too, are we talking, Ms. Cash, if I could, this is Jonathan, are you talking pre-K through 12, or were you just referring to pre-K through 3 with this second motion?
I was still referring to pre-K through 3.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you're referring to pre-K through 3, then that would be all elementary schools who can socially distance, that those schools would open.
They would open in full, and if they, as our superintendent said, a part of that could be that if they could not, they could rotate their pre-K through 3 in.
Just trying to make sure that I'm clear. So all elementary schools that can socially distance would open under Plan A?
All elementary schools that can ensure the recommended social distancing would open under Plan A, and those that are not able to would be in Plan B.
Okay.
And we don't know what those schools are right now.
We do not.
We do not.
And that's K through 3. I'm sorry to interject. But
Correct, pre-K through 3.
And I just want to make sure we're saying elementary school, and then we're saying pre-K through 3. So
Correct.
It's pre-K through 3, not the full elementary. Sorry to interject.
Okay. Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. So, again, I'm going back to this letter from the Division of Principals and Assistant Principals that we got this week. And, you know, I'm looking at this as one of the reasons why we're even here. I know. Because if not for these changes in conditions, and not just our teachers, not just, you know, parents or students, but, you know, our school-based management teams telling us that we can't do this, then I don't understand why we're here and even delaying anything. Because, you know, you can talk about those early learners. I would talk about the high school kids and how long they've been out of school. So, you know, looking at this letter from the principals, it says, if schools are to return K through fifth graders to daily in-person instruction, we will be unable to enforce consistent social distancing at neither 3 or 6 feet. And it goes on to say elsewhere in the letter, at the current positivity throughout the county, and it cites it, safety is reduced, especially when one of the W's, social distancing, cannot be maintained with K through 5 classes of 20 students. And so what I worry about, I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate where your heart is, but I don't want to give parents false hope, and I don't want to give students false hope and make them think that we're going to come back with this list of schools. Out of all of our schools in the district, this special handful of schools can open, and then only to find out when we come back, you know, based on this, like what they've already told us, that they can't.
Well, in all due respect, I took that letter at its face value.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I found out that they never really talked about the K-3 to the principals.
Okay, just I want to be clear.
And I didn't find that out till recently.
I want to be clear. It seems to me, and Superintendent Moore, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's 2 different communications. There's this letter from the Division of Principals, which clearly talks about K through 5th grade.
It does.
Right? It's not 4th through 5th grade. It's K through 5, and then also K-12. It's not just elementary school principals. This is the entire division, all of us, and that the work that staff did to go back asking about 4-5 was based on board member questions about 4th and 5th grade and social distancing and some of the things that they heard. And so that it was staff that went back and only, when they were inquiring about 4 and 5, only talked about 4 and 5, the senior leadership team and others. So they were only talking about 4-5, and the principals that you're talking to weren't asked by staff, central leadership staff, about K through 3, but this letter addresses
that's what I was referring to, and I was trying to clarify. I got the impression in that the division did not ask about the K-3. But if that's not true, then I'm just...
Yeah.
I'm not trying to treat the kids differently. I'm trying to understand what principals were asked by the Division of Principals.
And it is unlikely that the division reflects unanimity. I mean, or not unanimity, but a unanimous consensus. I don't think you're going to find that. I think you're going to find schools or principals that are okay with different levels of Plan A, Plan B, kids in the building. I think you're going to find some that are not, and I think the letter from the division reflects where they landed as the division, but doesn't necessarily mean that every single principal would agree with that.
Okay, and I just thought I didn't think they were asked that question about K-3.
Not by school system staff.
Okay, so anyhow, I hold my motion. If there's not a second, I understand.
All right, so I've got a motion from Mrs. Cash to open elementary schools K-3. Those that can socially distance would open on Plan B, and those that could not would open on Plan B. Was there a second?
Might I just repeat that one time? I'm just sorry. What I heard was that they would open if they could socially distance pre-K through 3 under Plan A, if they could socially distance, and then Plan B if they could not socially distance. That was the motion. I just want to make sure there was clarity on that. Thank you.
That's the correct motion.
That's correct.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Is there a second? Going once, going twice. That motion then fails for lack of a second.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jonathan. I'd like to interject, if I could make a suggestion by way of moving constructively. And I want to give board members absolute grace on their motions, but I do think that it would be more constructive if there were a motion to change, if anybody's so inclined, to change what is the board's current plan. I'm not trying to tilt things one way or the other, but I just think that that would be more constructive, because you had a plan that the board approved, and then the question really before the board today and what the superintendent was recommending would be a change to that. And so I think it would be more constructive to see if the board does or does not favor a change to what was currently planned.
Question,
Sir.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Is a question for Mr. Blumberg. So I believe we had a motion on the floor to adopt the staff recommendation, and then you didn't make it yet? Okay, I thought you were
I
trying to
never heard
divide
that
that motion.
I never got it. I was asking for a motion that would either be support or in support of the staff, Superintendent Moore's recommendation, and then Ms. Cash presented hers.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that we accept the staff recommendation to move forward, keeping the entire system in the remote instruction with reevaluation for consideration for the next steps in February. Thank you. And really, it's to support the staff's recommendation. You can take whatever language you want to, but we, the board, support staff's recommendation. That is the motion.
So I have a motion from Dr. Martin to change the board's previous decision around the second semester opening plans and to now accept staff's current recommendation, Superintendent Moore's current recommendation for all students to remain in remote learning pre-K through 12 until mid-February. Is there a second?
Second.
Got a second from Mrs. Scott. I'm getting a motion from Dr. Martin, second from Mrs. Scott. Is there any discussion?
I would, Mr. Chair, when we talked about this moving to Plan A back in November before Thanksgiving, we had some concerns of what January would look like. And I remember, asking for some clarity. Is that a caveat that this is where we're going, or are we going to see what happens in January and continue? We did that in December with the pause, and here we are again, not knowing where the metrics would be on this day as we make this decision. And so I will be voting in support of this motion.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right, the ayes have it. That is 7 board members, Mahaffey, Martin, Scott, Kushner, Johnson, Hostler, Hegarty, Sutton in favor of the motion. Board members Cash and Carter voted in opposition to the motion. So the motion passes at a vote of 7-2.
Chair Sutton, I notice that's the end of our agenda. I make a motion to adjourn.
If I could just
Not
ask
yet.
for one point of clarification. Do we want to engage at this time, or do you want us to bring a proposal back next week on Tuesday about the timeline for some things, or do we want to establish that now?
I think it'd probably be helpful to do that.
And I landed in one of two places earlier, which was to either have a board meeting on the 9th, where we would propose something for the week of the 15th. And, I mean, just so you know, traditional calendar has 2 days out at the beginning of that week, but I think year-round is fully in, so you would have different starting dates then. So the week of the 15th, or a board meeting with and so depending on how you want to stage this, too, you're talking about a recommendation on the 9th. No, it'd be the 22nd. Okay, the recommendation on the 9th that would be implemented. I just lost my train of thought.
On the
So
16th.
in order to implement on the 15th, we would need a decision either on the 2nd at our regular scheduled meeting, or calling a meeting as an option on the 9th, with then implementation on Monday, February 15th. or we have a board meeting on the 16th, which is our regular scheduled meeting, for then possible implementation on Monday, the 22nd.
So let me take it a little bit further, because unless you want to recommend and vote again on the same night, which we know is difficult to do, and to give longer period of time for public comment and reaction, but to also give enough time to actually see time for something to change in the metrics and for us to have data to look at. A scheduled board meeting on the 9th to review a plan with a decision on the 16th that would be implemented on the 22nd, or a plan that would be brought on the 16th that would be voted on the 23rd that would be implemented on March 1st. You know, that it's because unless you want to be brought a plan on the same night that you might be voting on.
I think March 1st just sort of pushes it out further.
It does.
We've already sort of said mid-February, but any thoughts, Ms. Kushner?
Yeah, I appreciate having you talk through those dates, though, Superintendent Moore, because I am concerned that we are just keep moving the dates. We're meeting the 19th. We're meeting February 2nd. I mean, I think we should be revisiting this decision, as we are now, compared to January 5th, every time we meet.
Right.
Again, things could look better on February 2nd. They could look better on the 19th. They could look worse on the 19th. So I think we need to revisit this each time, and that's why it would, I envy the districts that have put a date, but I do think March 1st just seems late to me.
Right.
And particularly, I appreciate, Mr. Hager, bringing up the high schoolers and Chair Sutton. We've all meant, they are weighing on, having so much time out. So I would like us not to drag this on and to come up with more precise timing earlier.
Dr. Martin?
So I appreciate your mapping out the multiple possibilities, and I think to several of our points, we don't want this to keep appearing like it's an arbitrary decision that just keeps getting kicked down the road. I think to Ms. Mahaffey's point, which I strongly agree with, there's sort of this framework of the state restrictions, the state county data, and the district indicators, but then there's no reference point. So to Ms. Kushner's point, at every one of our board meetings, we ought to have our own little dashboard that has, here are the governor's executive orders, here's the DHS guidance, here's the community spread, here's the positive cases, or I'd rather say community incidents, here is the staffing issue. In other words, give ourselves a reference point. Because I can't sit here tonight and say, should we start the decision process on February 1, February 9, February 16th? To do that would be saying, I'm not really interested in the data, I'm just interested in declaring a date. And I think what we need to do is make sure we're making the decision based on the indicators, which is what we say we're going to do. So I'd like to see a reference point to say, this is where we are today, and then let's look at how do those reference points change at each of our board meetings. And I think that will inform when to, you're completely correct that we want to have a stage series because we don't want to have this, here's the information, vote on it the same day, implement it the next day, or even a week from there. We want a clear series, but that series, I think, needs to be triggered by the information in the framework. So let's document where we are, and then get an update on those specific points at each meeting, and I think that will help both us and the public in future decisions.
I don't disagree with you at all, Dr. Martin, and I appreciate that point of seeing those metrics. I was more inclined to go with Superintendent Moore's first suggestion of dates because then, by seeing them, we would see those trends, right? Are we trending downward versus are we just having a date? And so I agree, I want the kids back in school as soon as possible, but I don't want for our parents to see this roller coaster of, oh, maybe they'll do it today, maybe they'll do it this time. And so if we know that there's going to be a vote on this day, there's at least some consistency leading up to that.
I mean, generally that, I would agree with that, but in this instance, I don't. For me personally, and I think as I spoke to it early, each time those metrics are laid out reflects a different decision. And so for me, if we choose, which I feel is an arbitrary date, that to me is really letting people believe, okay, you're going to finally do something different for those who are still believing that we are truly following the metrics as we say, versus being very transparent that the metrics does change. And making a decision on an arbitrary date is the same thing as making it at each board meeting. And so I just think that there's for me, some modicum of transparency in looking at that data every single time, even if we're just taking a temperature of where people are, because right now we all know the 3 metrics and we all have a sense of what we want to see, but until we actually are comparing apples to apples, which we haven't done, I mean, this is the first time we've clearly said to the public, we are looking at these things, and here's how we will look at them. That's my personal opinion. It is a yo-yo, but we already feel like it's a yo-yo because it is. And so for us to say that it's not, that's also not true.
And I will just say that when in the presentation, staff talked about reviewing the status to determine next steps mid-February, but want to open the conversation for, does that mean decision, go ahead and map it out, plan it out? But certainly the need and desire of the board, if that is your will, to continue to update on each of those things as we move forward and towards the goal of having a decision by mid-February is okay also.
Scott.
Staff, in the meantime, I'd like that if we could clarify that before we leave as well, whether or not teachers should report to buildings or if they have the option. Given that we're talking about community spread, I think, of course, it is probably safer, just me, for them to be able to access the building if they need. There are some who prefer being in their classrooms. That's where the materials are, internet speed, et cetera.
We would be implementing similar to when we took the pause before break to provide maximum flexibility to staff to continue to telework.
I appreciate that because they're also managing, many of them, their own school-age children. And then I do agree with Ms. Kushner. I would hope that every opportunity we have updates on the asks and the metrics that we're looking at, that we would be provided with those for the public to digest as well. Thank you.
Ms. Cash.
So am I to understand, because I totally have a lot of faith in the ABC Collaborative, that we are actually now not going to refer to that anymore? And the reason I ask is for one, the metrics of the community did not necessarily reflect, as what the ABC Collaborative said, what is going to be happening in the school. I just want to know, are we now just disregarding ABC Collaborative because we're talking about metrics? So
No. And I'll answer for me personally. I absolutely agree with the ABC Collaborative, and I hear what they're saying about schools are not places where we see high amounts of secondary spread. But for me, if we don't have the staff in place in the building.
So that's my point. It's not that I want to know, are we going to follow the things that they're saying in the ABC Collaborative when we're looking at the metrics? Because for me, they would have to all work together.
It's important to recognize the ABC Collaborative is not saying don't pay attention to metrics. They're saying don't have a simplistic line in the sand approach to metrics. And I haven't heard anybody at the table talk about a simplistic line in the sand approach to metrics. So I think we have to pay
Therefore,
attention.
I'm just clarifying, is the ABC Collaborative report, the fact of the conclusion they made about kids in classrooms, going to still be taken in? Because I only heard metrics here several times. I'm just reinforcing or clarifying.
The conclusions of their manuscript state that all 3 W's need to be adhered to rigorously, and as long as that is happening in a setting where there is a modest amount of infection, then schools can operate safely. That is the conclusion of their manuscript. And that's not saying anything different than anybody at this table is saying. The 3 W's
And
are
that was
important.
actually not my argument. My argument was we talked about metrics.
Yeah,
I just want to be sure that's included in it.
I understand your question.
You got it?
Mr. Hegarty.
So just to be clear, one of the things that I specifically asked for our future meetings was to bring the ABC Collaborative back, because I do want to hear from them, and I do want to hear, as they've seen, higher infection rates, has this made a difference? If they've had schools that have stayed, in face-to-face when infection rates were higher, has that made a difference in the recommendations? And continue to rely on it. I mean, the superintendent wrote it down, so I definitely disagree that we would want to disregard their stuff. I very much
Right.
agree with you that we need to continue that.
All right, we're not disregarding their information. And, again, to be clear, as I think they would say, that they're just helping us to synthesize data, understand the data. They're not making a decision for the board or even making a recommendation. That is still left up to this board, but they're just sharing information and data and research with us. So,
And please understand, too, that I know metrics have been talked a lot about, but for I think a lot of us, the issue has been staffing and whether or not we can offer those courses consistently, knowing every week we're going to be able to offer you a face-to-face class each day this week and not have to, send out messages the night before saying, well, guess what, it's asynchronous, or guess what, it's remote, because we don't have the staff for it.
Yeah, and I will also say, I mean, I think that was I'm glad you asked the question, because quite frankly, I think we also have to, which Mr. Hegarty, actually all three of you clarified it, is the ABC Collaborative is honestly like the government. They haven't actually given us a definitive opinion. They've provided us, I believe, additional information for us to utilize. So I would hope, I personally, even though it's not apples to each school, but that would be, right? So the schools who have remained in and their numbers have gone up in their communities, can you tell us if there's been a correlation to the infection rate inside of schools? I think that's valuable information for us to still use. And for me, it's another lens that I would filter through what we see happening. And I will just end with, that's why I keep saying these 3 variables that we're using have to remain on the table. We have to do exactly what you did, which was ask for clarification so the public is also clear on what we are using to make our decisions. And again, acknowledging we could be weighing them very differently, each of us individually, but we're all of us are using the exact same 3 frameworks to think through our decisions.
So what I'm going to suggest, we've got a meeting scheduled for the 19th and then again on the 2nd. And then on the 16th, let me ask you then to just hold the 9th, if you'll put a hold on February the 9th. Anticipating that we may make a decision at the February 9th meeting for then implementation on Monday the 15th. And that would, in my mind, that would hold us to the promise that we really just made in our previous motion, that we would have a decision by mid-February, unless you would rather wait until the 16th. But I think that's, if we can shoot for that we make a decision by the 9th for implementation on February 15th. All right? All right. I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Ms. Mahaffey, second by Ms. Johnson-Hostler to adjourn. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by sign of aye. Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much.